a dead child, a burning ranch, a man who learned too late that silence kills. Clay Mercer thought he'd buried his chance at redemption along with his past, until a barefoot girl collapsed on his porch at midnight, carrying bruises like a map of hell, and a sister's name she could barely whisper without breaking. Silas Crowley owns half the county and the paperwork that says Wren belongs to him. But Clay knows what those bruises mean. He knows what happens to children who disappear into cellars and never come out. This time, he won't look away. Follow this story to the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far Wren's story travels. Now, let's begin. The Wyoming Territory in late July was a land that had forgotten mercy. The sun hammered down like a smith working iron, baking the earth until it cracked open in jagged lines that looked like wounds refusing to heal. The grass had surrendered weeks ago, turning from green to gold to the color of old bones. Even the wind offered no relief. It just pushed the heat around, carrying dust that coated everything. The fence posts, the water troughs, the back of Clay Mercer's throat when he worked outside too long. Clay's ranch sat in a shallow valley between two ridges, far enough from town that visitors were rare, and far enough from neighbors that he could pretend he preferred it that way. The house was functional. 2 stories of weathered timber that had seen better decades, a porch that sagged slightly on the western end, shutters that needed paint. The barn leaned just enough to suggest character without promising collapse. It was the kind of place a man built when he had hope, then maintained out of stubborn habit after hope moved on. He lived alone. Had for 3 years now, ever since Margaret died giving birth to a son who followed her 6 hours later. The graves were up on the ridge where the cottonwoods grew, marked with stones Clay had carved himself, because he couldn't stand the thought of store-bought words. He visited them every Sunday, hat in hand, saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. Apologies didn't raise the dead. Neither did grief, though God knew he'd tested that theory thoroughly. These days, Clay kept himself busy the way a drowning man keeps swimming, not because he believed he'd reach shore, but because stopping meant sinking. He rose before dawn, worked until his muscles ached, ate standing at the kitchen counter, and fell into bed too tired to dream. His foreman, Eli Rourke, handled most of the day-to-day operations with the half-dozen ranch hands they kept on payroll. Clay took the jobs that required silence, mending fence alone on the far pasture, checking the water sources in the hills, riding the property line where the land stretched out so wide and empty it almost felt clean. He'd become a functional ghost, present but not participating, alive in the technical sense. That changed on a Thursday night in the last week of July, when the heat still clung to the air at midnight like something with claws. Clay had been in the kitchen, pouring whiskey he wouldn't drink, just the ritual of it, the sound of liquid hitting glass, the smell that reminded him of his father. He was staring at the amber pour when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost convinced himself it was the wind testing the doorframe. But then it came again, a knock, barely there, the kind of sound made by someone who was either very weak or very afraid. Clay set down the bottle and crossed the room, boot heels loud against the pine floor. He wasn't expecting company. Nobody came out this far after dark unless they were lost or running, and lost people usually made more noise. He opened the door. For a moment his brain refused to process what he was seeing. The porch was empty, or appeared to be, until his eyes dropped and found her. A child. A girl. Maybe 10 years old, barefoot and swaying like a sapling in a wind too strong for its roots. Her dress had once been gray or maybe tan, hard to tell under the coating of dust that covered her from collar to hem. Her hair hung in matted tangles around a face so gaunt the bones seemed too close to the surface. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her feet left prints on the porch boards, not dirt, but something darker. Blood mixed with dust, tacky and still wet. But it was her eyes that stopped Clay's heart. They were too old, too knowing. The eyes of someone who'd seen things no child should see and survived them by becoming something other than a child. She looked up at him, and her mouth shaped a single word. Please. Then her knees buckled. Clay moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the porch. She weighed almost nothing, less than a feed sack, less than a newborn calf. He could feel every rib through the thin fabric of her dress, feel the heat radiating off her skin like she was burning from the inside. Jesus, he whispered. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The house was still hot from the day's heat, but at least it was out of the wind. He laid her on the sofa, the old one Margaret had insisted on keeping even when the spring started poking through, and grabbed the water pitcher from the kitchen. Her eyes had closed. For a terrible second he thought she'd died in his arms, that whatever had brought her this far had finally given out. But then her chest hitched with a shallow breath, and her eyelids fluttered. "Don't," Clay said, though he wasn't sure what he was asking her not to do. "Don't die. Don't give up. Don't make me bury another child." He wetted a cloth and pressed it to her lips. She stirred, her mouth opening reflexively. He squeezed a few drops onto her tongue, watching her throat work to swallow. Then a few more. Her eyes opened, dark brown, almost black in the lamplight, and locked onto his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Easy," he said. "Small sips. You'll make yourself sick." She didn't respond, just stared at him like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Her gaze tracked his hands, followed the movement of the cloth, watched the water pitcher like it might disappear if she looked away. Clay had seen that look before. In horses that had been beaten, in dogs left chained too long in the sun. In his own reflection, once, after his father's belt had taught him that trust was a luxury and safety was a lie people told children. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice low and even. She didn't answer, just kept staring. "I'm Clay," he tried again. "This is my ranch. You're safe here." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He leaned closer. "Wren," she whispered. The word was barely air. "My name is Wren." "Wren," he repeated. "That's a good name. Where did you come from, Wren?" She flinched at the question. Her whole body went rigid, and her eyes darted toward the door like she was calculating how fast she could run. Clay raised his hand slowly, palms out. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "Not right now, but I need to get you to a doctor. You're hurt, and you're burning up." "No." The word came out sharp, almost a gasp. "No, doctor. They'll send me back." "Back where?" She closed her eyes. A tear slipped free and cut a clean line through the dust on her cheek. "I can't, please. I can't go back." Clay felt something twist in his chest, something that had been dormant for 3 years, something that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. "Okay," he said. "Okay. But I'm still getting a doctor, just to make sure you're all right. Nobody's sending you anywhere." He didn't know if he could keep that promise, didn't know what he was stepping into or what it would cost. But looking at this child who'd walked through hell to reach his door, he knew he couldn't turn away. Not this time. Oh. Dr. May Hollis arrived within the hour, riding her bay mare hard enough to raise dust even in the dead of night. She was a small woman in her mid-40s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun and hands that moved with the precision of someone who'd set bones and delivered babies in storm-lit cabins for 2 decades. She carried her medical bag like a weapon and her reputation like armor, one of the few women doctors in the territory, which meant she'd had to be twice as good and 3 times as stubborn to earn the respect she commanded. She took one look at Wren on the sofa, and her jaw tightened. "How long has she been like this?" "Found her maybe 40 minutes ago," Clay said. "She collapsed on my porch." May knelt beside the sofa, her movements economical. She pressed the back of her hand to Wren's forehead, checked her pulse, lifted each eyelid with a gentleness that contradicted the steel in her expression. "Get me cool water. Not cold, cool. And clean cloths. At least 6. Clay moved. In the kitchen, he pumped water into a basin, testing the temperature with his wrist the way Margaret used to when she bathed their son, the one who never got a name because he never drew enough breath to need one. He shook off the memory and carried the basin back to the sitting room along with every clean cloth he could find. May had removed Wren's dress and was examining her in the lamplight. What Clay saw made his vision narrow to a pinpoint, made his hands curl into fists before he forced them open again. Bruises. Everywhere. Some fresh and purple-black, some fading to yellow-green, some so old they were barely shadows. They covered her arms, her back, her legs. Wrist marks in perfect finger-width bands. A necklace of bruising around her throat that suggested hands had pressed there with intent. Jesus Christ, Clay breathed. Hold the lamp closer, May said. Her voice was flat, professional, but Clay could hear the rage underneath, the kind that didn't shout, just burned cold and patient. She worked in silence, documenting each injury with the clinical detachment of someone taking inventory. Bruised ribs, burns on her palms consistent with rope friction, blisters on the soles of her feet so severe the skin had peeled away, dehydration severe enough that her lips had split in 3 places, heat exhaustion, malnutrition. No broken bones, May said finally. That's something, but she's been walking for days. In this heat, barefoot. She glanced at Clay. Where the hell did she come from? She won't say, only that she can't go back. May's expression went darker. She pulled a blanket over Wren, covering her gently, preserving what dignity a 10-year-old had left after being stripped and catalogued like evidence. Someone did this to her, she said. Someone hurt this child repeatedly over time. This isn't an accident. This is deliberate. Clay knew, had known the moment he saw those bruises, but hearing May say it out loud made it real in a way that bypassed thought and went straight to fury. Can you help her? I can treat the immediate symptoms, the dehydration, the burns, the fever, but she needs rest, food, safety, and she needs time. May looked at him directly. Can you give her that? Yes. Even if whoever did this comes looking? Clay met her gaze. Especially then. May studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll stay tonight. Make sure her fever breaks, but tomorrow we need to figure out where she came from and what we're dealing with. She mixed a powder into water, something to bring down the fever, and coaxed Wren into drinking it. The girl's eyes tracked May's every movement, wary and exhausted at the same time. When May pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, Wren flinched, then relaxed by slow degrees, like she was learning in real time that not all touch meant pain. Clay watched from the doorway, feeling useless. He was good with cattle, with horses, with fence line and water rights and all the practical problems that could be solved with work and wire. But this required something he didn't know if he still had. Clay, May said without looking up, get some sleep. You'll need your strength for what's coming. He didn't argue, just climbed the stairs to his room, lay down fully clothed on top of the quilt, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Instead, he thought about the child downstairs, about the bruises that told a story in their own language, about the way she'd whispered please like it was the only word she had left. And he thought about his son, the one who never got to grow up, never got to run or play or walk dusty roads in search of safety, the one he'd buried without a name. Maybe, he thought, maybe this was how you paid for past failures, not with forgiveness, but with a second chance you didn't deserve and couldn't afford to waste. Morning came hot and bright, the sun climbing over the ridge like it had a personal grudge against anything still living. Clay woke to the smell of coffee, strong and bitter, the way Eli made it, and found his foreman in the kitchen, standing at the stove with the kind of careful silence that meant he'd already seen the girl on the sofa. Eli Rourke was 10 years older than Clay, lean and weathered like a fence post that had stood through too many seasons. He'd been with the ranch since before Margaret, had helped Clay bury his wife and son without asking questions or offering platitudes. He was the closest thing Clay had to a friend, which mostly meant they worked side by side in comfortable silence and only spoke when words were actually necessary. Doc's with her, Eli said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. Said the fever broke around 3. Girl's sleeping now. Clay took the offered cup and drank. The coffee scalded his throat, but he welcomed it. What time did you get here? Sunup. Saw the doc's horse outside and figured something happened. Eli's gaze was steady. You want to tell me what we're into? Don't know yet, Clay admitted. She showed up last night, barefoot, half dead, covered in bruises. Won't say where she came from, only that she can't go back. Runaway. Or escapee. Eli absorbed this with a slight nod. You planning to keep her? It was a fair question, the kind that required an honest answer. Clay looked toward the sitting room where May's shadow moved against the lamplight. I'm planning to make sure whoever hurt her doesn't get another chance. That might be harder than you think. People don't take kindly to accusations, especially against their own. Then I guess we'll find out what kind of people they are. Eli smiled, barely, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. All right then, what do you need? Information. She came from somewhere close enough to reach on foot. Someone's missing a child. Start asking around town, quiet-like. See if anyone's looking for a girl named Wren. And if they are, find out who they are and what they want her for. Don't tell them she's here. Eli drained his coffee and set the cup down with a soft clink. I'll take a couple of the boys. Make it look like we're just buying supplies and catching up on gossip. He paused at the door. Clay, be careful. If someone's willing to do that to a child, they won't hesitate to do worse to anyone who gets in their way. I know. After Eli left, Clay checked on Wren. May had moved her to the downstairs bedroom, the one Margaret used to use for sewing, before the baby came and she'd started planning a nursery instead. The girl was asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. In sleep, she looked impossibly young. The wariness was gone, the two old eyes hidden, and what remained was just a child who should have been safe and wasn't. May appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a towel. Her fever's down. She'll sleep most of the day. When she wakes up, she'll need food. Broth first, nothing heavy. And she'll need gentleness. Don't crowd her. Don't ask too many questions. Just let her know she's safe and mean it. I do mean it. I know, but she doesn't. Not yet. May folded the towel with precise creases. I've seen this before, Clay. Children who've been hurt learn to survive by reading people. She'll test you, push back. Wait for you to prove you're like everyone else who hurt her, or let her be hurt. Don't fail that test. What if I do? Then she'll run again, and next time she might not survive the journey. The weight of that settled between them. Clay nodded slowly. Thank you for coming, for helping. Don't thank me. Just keep her safe. May picked up her bag. I'll come back this evening, check on her progress. And Clay, when she does talk, and she will, eventually, listen to everything she says, even the parts that don't make sense, especially those. She left through the front door, her mare's hoofbeats fading into the morning heat. Clay stood in the doorway of the small bedroom, watching the rise and fall of Wren's breathing. He didn't know her story yet, didn't know what she'd survived or what was still hunting her, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't let her face it alone. Mom. Wren woke in the late afternoon when the shadows were starting to stretch long across the floor. Clay was in the kitchen when he heard movement, the soft creak of bed springs, the shuffle of bare feet on wood. He gave her space, just set a bowl of broth on the table and waited. She appeared in the doorway like a ghost, wrapped in a blanket May had left, her hair still tangled but her face cleaner now. She looked at the broth, at Clay, then back at the broth. It's for you, Clay said, if you're hungry. She didn't move, just stood there, calculating. After a long moment, she crossed to the table and sat down, keeping the chair between herself and Clay. She picked up the spoon, slowly, like she expected someone to slap it out of her hand, and sipped. The first taste made her eyes close. The second made her hands shake. By the third, she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face while she ate like someone starving, which Clay realized she probably was. He didn't say anything, just let her finish, then refilled the bowl from the pot on the stove. She ate that one slower, with more control, but her eyes never left him. When the second bowl was empty, she finally spoke. Why? Why what? Why are you helping me? Clay considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up in grief and regret, and the ghost of a son he'd never known. But Wren didn't need complicated. She needed simple truth. Because you asked, he said, and because I could. She frowned, like this didn't fit the pattern she'd learned. People don't help, not without wanting something back. Some people do. Not in my experience. Then maybe, Clay said carefully, your experience has been full of the wrong kind of people. Wren stared at him for a long time. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Maybe. That night, she told him her name wasn't just Wren. It was Wren Ashby, and she'd had a sister named Lark. Had, past tense. The word hung in the air like smoke from a dead fire. What happened to her? Clay asked. Wren's hands twisted in the blanket. She died. A month ago. In the cellar. What cellar? His cellar, where he put us when we were bad. Her voice was flat, reciting facts like she was reading from a list. It was dark, no windows, no light, just dirt and cold and the sound of Lark coughing. Clay felt his jaw tighten. Who's he? Mr. Crowley, Silas Crowley. He took us from the orphan placement in Laramie, said he needed workers for his ranch, said we'd have food and beds and safety. She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. He lied. Where's his ranch? North, maybe 60 miles. I walked at night, hid during the day, drank from creeks. I don't remember all of it, just walking and being scared. Wren, Clay said gently, what happened to Lark? The girl's face crumpled. She got sick, the cellar was wet, and she couldn't stop coughing. I begged him to get a doctor, but he said doctors cost money and we weren't worth it. He said if she died, it was God's will. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She died in my arms, in the dark, and he made me help bury her in the field where nobody would find her. Clay's hands clenched around his coffee cup hard enough that the tin bent. Rage, pure and cold and absolute, flooded through him. Not the hot fury that burned out fast, but the kind that settled deep and waited for the right moment. After that, Wren continued, he locked me back in the cellar, said I'd stay there until I learned gratitude, but I knew if I stayed, I'd die too, so I waited until he left for town, broke the cellar door, and I ran. How long ago? 5 days, maybe 6. It's hard to remember. 6 days, 60 miles. Barefoot in late July heat. This child had walked through conditions that killed grown men, driven by nothing but the will to survive and the certainty that staying meant death. You're safe now, Clay said. I promise you. Crowley won't touch you again. Wren looked at him with those 2 old eyes. He'll come for me. He has papers, legal papers that say I belong to him. Papers can be fought. Not by people like you. He's rich, important. Everyone in town knows him. They smile when he walks by. Then, Clay said quietly, I guess we'll have to teach them to stop smiling. For the first time since she'd arrived, something like hope flickered across Wren's face. Fragile and uncertain, but there. Tap. Eli returned 2 days later with news that made Clay's blood run cold. Silas Crowley was indeed one of the wealthiest ranchers in 3 counties, owned land, cattle, and enough political influence to ensure the law generally looked the other way when it came to his business. He'd been taking in orphans through official channels for years, claiming he gave them work and training. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked too close. There's talk, though, Eli said, standing in Clay's kitchen with his hat in his hands. Whispers. About children who arrived and were never seen again. About a cook who quit suddenly and left town in the middle of the night. About sounds coming from the property that didn't sit right with folks. He paused. But talk is cheap. Nobody's willing to go on record. Why not? Because Crowley owns the bank, holds mortgages on half the farms in the county. Cross him, and suddenly your loan gets called in, your credit dries up, your reputation gets shredded in ways you can't prove but can't escape. Eli's expression was grim. Fear's a powerful thing, Clay. It makes people swallow truths they know in their bones just to keep their heads down. What about the law? Sheriff Danner? Danner's a decent man caught in a bad position. He knows something's wrong, but without proof or witnesses, his hands are tied. And Crowley's made sure there's neither. Clay absorbed this. We need proof then, and witnesses. Easier said than done. Anyone who worked for Crowley and saw something either stayed silent or disappeared. Eli hesitated. There's one person, though, the cook I mentioned, woman named Nora Vance. She's living in Cheyenne now, working at a boarding house. Eli managed to track her down through a friend of a friend. She might talk. Then I'll go to Cheyenne. Clay, if Crowley finds out, let him. Clay's voice was quiet but absolute. I'm not handing that girl back to the man who killed her sister and damn near killed her. Eli studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll hold down the ranch while you're gone, but be quick. Crowley's bound to notice she's missing eventually. When he does, he'll start looking. Let him look. When he finds her, he'll find me too. That night, Clay told Wren he was leaving for a few days. She went pale, her hands gripping the edges of the quilt May had tucked around her. "You're not coming back," she said flatly. "I am." "That's what people say, right before they don't." Clay knelt beside the bed so they were eye level. "Wren, listen to me. I'm going to find someone who can help us. Someone who saw what Crowley did and is willing to say so in front of a judge. But I need you to trust me. I know that's hard. I know you've got no reason to, but I'm asking anyway." She searched his face like she was looking for cracks. "What if you don't come back?" "Then Eli stays, and Dr. May. And you've got this house and everything in it, but I will come back. I give you my word." "Words don't mean much." "I know. So watch my actions, that's how you'll know." Wren was silent for a long moment. Then, barely audible, "Okay." Clay left at dawn, riding hard for Cheyenne with a name and an address and a hope that was more prayer than plan. He found Nora Vance 3 days later, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and hands that shook when she poured tea. She lived in a single room above the boarding house where she cooked, and when Clay explained why he'd come, she went very still. "I can't," she said finally. "I can't go back there, can't testify, can't risk it." "A child is dead," Clay said. "Another nearly died getting away. How many more before someone speaks up?" "You don't understand. Crowley, he has reach, power. If I testify, I'll lose everything, my job, my safety, maybe my life. If you don't, more children will die, and you'll have to live knowing you could have stopped it." Nora's face crumpled. "I heard them," she whispered. "The children in the cellar, crying at night, begging for food, for water, for light. I heard them, and I did nothing because I was scared, because I needed the money, because I told myself it wasn't my business." She looked at Clay with eyes full of shame. "I'm a coward." "No," Clay said. "You were scared. There's a difference. But now you have a choice. You can stay scared and let him keep hurting children, or you can be brave for 5 minutes in a courtroom and help me stop him. He'll destroy me. Maybe. Or maybe seeing one person stand up will give others the courage to do the same. But either way, at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll sleep at night." Nora was quiet for a long time. Then so softly Clay almost missed it. "When do we leave?" They rode back together, reaching the ranch on a Friday evening just as the sun dipped below the ridge. Wren was on the porch with May, snapping beans into a bowl. When she saw Clay, her face transformed, relief and something fiercer flooding her expression. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." "I know." She smiled, small and tentative, but real. "I'm starting to believe you." That night, Clay introduced Nora to Wren. The older woman took one look at the girl's bruised arms and began to cry, silent, shaking sobs that spoke of guilt and recognition and regret. "I'm sorry," Nora whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't help you. I didn't help any of you." Wren looked at her for a long moment. Then, with a gravity no 10-year-old should possess, "You're helping now. That's what matters." The storm came on Saturday night. Not snow, but a summer thunderstorm that rolled across the plains like divine fury made weather. The sky turned black and green, the wind screaming through the valley hard enough to rattle windows and tear shingles loose. Rain came in sheets, hammering the roof and turning the yard into a mud pit. Lightning strobed the world into freeze-frame images. Fence posts, the barn door swinging wild, the ridge outlined in white fire. Clay was securing the barn when he heard the crack. Thunder, he thought at first, but then he saw the smoke rising from the ridge and realized lightning had hit a tree. He was running back to the house, soaked and breathless, when he nearly collided with Wren in the doorway. She was up, dressed, boiling water on the stove with a focus that suggested purpose. Clay's hand had gone to the gun on his hip before his brain caught up. Pure instinct, the same reflex that kept you alive when things went sideways fast. He'd been halfway to drawing when he realized it was Wren, just Wren, doing something normal in the kitchen. He froze, lowered his hand slowly, felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Wren had seen it. She stood absolutely still, the kettle forgotten, her eyes locked on where his hand had been. Waiting, calculating, expecting violence because violence was what hands did when they moved fast. "Wren," Clay said carefully, keeping his voice even. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were up. You startled me, and I—" He stopped, took a breath. "I should have been more careful. That was my mistake, not yours." She blinked. "You're apologizing?" "Yes." "To me?" "Yes." She stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she'd never heard before. "But you didn't do anything. I was the one—" "You were boiling water in your own house. That's not a crime." Clay crouched down so they were eye level. "Wren, listen, you don't ever have to apologize for existing in this space, for being up at night, for making noise or needing something. This is your home now, and you have every right to be here exactly as you are." Her eyes filled with tears. "Nobody's ever said that before." "Then they were wrong, and I'm sorry for that too." She crossed the space between them in 2 steps and wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that wouldn't stop shaking. Clay held her, carefully at first, then tighter when he realized she needed the pressure, needed to know someone was strong enough to hold on even when everything else fell apart. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're okay. I've got you." They stayed like that while the storm raged outside. A man who'd forgotten how to hope, and a girl who'd forgotten how to trust, finding something in the wreckage that looked almost like family. Dawn broke clear and washed clean, the storm having scrubbed the air until it felt almost new. Clay was feeding the horses when he saw the riders coming, 6 of them, moving fast across the still wet grass. He recognized the man in front immediately. Silas Crowley sat his horse like a king surveying conquered territory, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore expensive clothes and carried himself with the ease of someone who'd never been told no and couldn't imagine starting now. Clay walked out to meet them, rifle held loose but ready. Behind him, he heard the house door open. Eli appeared on the porch, his own rifle cradled casual. May stepped out too, positioning herself where she could see everything. Crowley reined in 10 feet away and tipped his hat like they were meeting at a church social. "Mr. Mercer, fine morning after that storm, isn't it?" "What do you want, Crowley?" "Direct." "I like that." Crowley's smile widened. "I'm here for my property, a girl named Wren. Small thing, dark hair, probably half dead when she stumbled onto your land. I have legal documents stating she belongs to me, so if you'll just—" "No," Clay said. Crowley's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. She stays here." "I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Mercer. I have legal claim. Signed paperwork from the Territory Orphan Placement Office. She's indentured to me until she reaches majority. That's the law. The law doesn't protect children from being beaten and starved and locked in cellars to die." Something flickered in Crowley's eyes, there and gone in an instant. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have her testimony, and bruises that tell their own story. The testimony of a child prone to lying and bruises that could have come from anywhere. I treated that girl with nothing but Christian charity, and she repaid me by running off in the night." Crowley's voice hardened. "Now, you can hand her over peacefully, or I can come back with the sheriff and the full weight of the law. Your choice." Clay raised the rifle, not pointing it, just making it visible. "Here's my choice. You leave. Now. And you don't come back." Crowley's men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, violence held back by the thinnest margin. Then Sheriff Ross Danner rode into the yard, his badge catching the morning light. "Hold!" Danner called out. He was a weathered man in his late 50s, with the kind of face that had seen too much and still tried to do right when it mattered. He positioned his horse between Clay and Crowley, eyes moving between them. "Let's everybody just calm down and talk this through like civilized people." "Sheriff," Crowley said smoothly, "perfect timing. Mr. Mercer is harboring my legal property. I'd like you to facilitate her return." Danner looked at Clay. "That true? You have the Ashby girl." "Her name is Wren," Clay said. "And yes, she's here. Because she ran 60 miles barefoot to escape being beaten and starved. Because her sister died in Crowley's cellar, and he didn't even have the decency to give her a proper burial." "That's slander," Crowley snapped. "It's truth. And I've got a witness who'll testify to it." Danner's expression went carefully neutral. That's a serious claim, Clay. You got proof? Dr. Hollis documented her injuries, every bruise, every burn, every mark. And I've got Nora Vance, who worked in Crowley's house and saw what happened to the children there. Crowley's face went stone. Nora Vance is a bitter woman who was dismissed for theft. Her word means nothing. Then you won't mind her testifying under oath. Danner held up a hand. All right, here's what's going to happen. Crowley, you're going to ride back to your ranch and stay there. Clay, the girl stays with you for now. I'm going to investigate this properly. Talk to witnesses, examine evidence, consult with the territorial judge. Nobody makes a move until I say so. Understood? Crowley's smile had gone cold. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. Maybe, but it's mine to make. Danner turned his horse. 1 week, Clay. I'll give you 1 week to get your evidence together. After that, the law decides. He rode off, leaving Clay and Crowley facing each other across the wet grass. Crowley leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to something quiet and venomous. You just made an enemy you can't afford, Mercer. I own this county. The bank, the judge, half the businesses in town. You're a nobody with a dead wife and a failed ranch. You think you can fight me? He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I'll bury you. You can try, Clay said. But I've already been buried once. Didn't take then either. Crowley's eyes narrowed. Then he wheeled his horse and galloped off, his men following. Eli appeared at Clay's elbow. Well, that went about as well as expected. He'll be back, May said from the porch. And next time, he won't be polite. Clay knew she was right. Crowley had the law, the money, and the power. All Clay had was a traumatized child, a witness who was terrified, and a week to build a case that would stand against a man who'd spent years making himself untouchable. He looked back at the house where Wren stood in the window, her small face pressed against the glass. A week. It would have to be enough. The week Danner gave them felt like trying to hold water in a sieve. Every hour that passed brought them closer to a reckoning Clay wasn't sure they could win, and the weight of it settled over the ranch like the heat, oppressive, inescapable, turning everything brittle. Clay spent the first 2 days working on strategy with Eli and May, mapping out what they had versus what they needed. The facts were stark. Wren's testimony, May's medical documentation, and Nora's eyewitness account. Against that stood Crowley's legal paperwork, his reputation, his money, and a town full of people who'd learned that survival meant keeping their mouths shut and their eyes down. It's not enough, May said on the second evening, sitting at Clay's kitchen table with papers spread between them like evidence at a crime scene. A good lawyer will shred Wren's testimony, call her traumatized, confused, prone to exaggeration. They'll say the bruises could have come from her journey here, not from Crowley's treatment. And Nora, she paused, glancing toward the bedroom where the older woman was resting. Nora's terrified. If she freezes on the stand or contradicts herself even once, Crowley's people will tear her apart. So what do we do? Clay asked. We find more witnesses. Someone else who worked for Crowley, someone who saw the children, someone whose testimony can't be dismissed as bias or hysteria or revenge. Crowley's made sure there's nobody like that. Anyone who saw something either stayed quiet or disappeared. Eli, who'd been standing by the window watching the yard, turned around. Not necessarily. There's the tradespeople, the men who delivered supplies to his ranch, the farrier who shot his horses, the doc who used to make calls out there before Crowley stopped requesting medical visits. People like that see things, notice patterns. They might not have witnessed abuse directly, but they could testify to suspicious behavior. Missing children, locked doors, strange sounds. It's circumstantial, May said. It's better than nothing. And if we can get 3, 4, 5 people all saying something felt wrong, even if they can't prove it, that starts to paint a picture a jury might believe. Clay nodded slowly. All right, Eli, you and the boys start making quiet inquiries. Don't push too hard. Just ask questions and see who's willing to talk. May, can you check with other doctors? See if any of them treated injuries on children from Crowley's place. I can try, but if Crowley was smart, he never brought them to town for treatment. That's why Lark died. The mention of Lark made them all go quiet. In the bedroom down the hall, Wren was sleeping, or pretending to, curled up with a quilt May had brought and a rag doll Eli's wife had made. She hadn't asked about the legal fight, hadn't asked what would happen if they lost. But Clay saw it in her eyes every time Crowley's name came up. The knowledge that safety was temporary, that the world had a way of taking back whatever it pretended to give. "We're not losing this," Clay said, more to himself than to the others. "I don't care what it takes. We're not sending her back." May reached across the table and squeezed his hand, brief, almost brusque, but the gesture carried weight. "Then we'd better get to work." The next morning, Eli rode out with two of the ranch hands, good men who could be trusted to ask the right questions without advertising what they were looking for. Clay stayed at the ranch, partly because someone needed to watch over Wren and Nora, partly because his presence in town might spook potential witnesses who were already nervous about crossing Crowley. He spent the day on mundane tasks, mending fence, checking water levels, mucking out stalls, work that kept his hands busy while his mind churned through possibilities and contingencies. Around midday, Wren appeared at the barn door, barefoot despite May's instructions to wear the boots they'd found for her. "You're supposed to be resting," Clay said, not unkindly. "I'm tired of resting. I want to help." "You are helping. Just by being here, telling the truth about what happened. That's help." Wren's jaw set in a way that reminded Clay of Margaret when she'd made up her mind about something and wouldn't be budged. "That's not enough. I want to do something that matters." Clay leaned the pitchfork against the stall and studied her. She'd filled out a little in the week since she'd arrived, May's cooking and rest putting some color back in her cheeks, but she still looked fragile, like something that might break if the wind changed direction. Except her eyes. Those were hard as creek stones. "All right," he said. "Tell me what happened at Crowley's place. Everything you remember, not just the big things, the small things too. Details that might help us prove what he did." Wren went very still. "Why?" "I already told you." "I know, but there might be something you didn't think was important, something that seemed normal to you but isn't. Something that could help us find other witnesses or prove the pattern of what he was doing." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke, her voice was flat, the tone of someone reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. "There were 6 of us when I got there. Me and Lark, 2 boys, Henry and Thomas, and 2 older girls, Sarah and Rebecca. Crowley said we'd work in the house and the barn, earn our keep, learn trades." She paused. "But Sarah and Rebecca were gone within a month. Crowley said they ran off, but their things were still in the room we shared, their shoes, their brushes. Sarah had a locket her mother gave her. She never took it off. It was still hanging on the bedpost when she disappeared." Clay felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened to the boys?" "Henry got sent to work with the ranch hands. I'd see him sometimes, from a distance. He looked," she searched for the word, "broken, like he'd given up. Thomas tried to run. Crowley's men brought him back. I don't know what they did to him, but he screamed for hours. After that, he stopped talking, just stared at nothing." "Where are they now?" "I don't know. After Lark died, I was alone. Crowley kept me in the cellar most of the time. When he let me out, it was to work in the kitchen under Nora's supervision. I never saw the boys again." Clay's hands curled into fists. 4 children. 4 children besides Wren and Lark. All of them vanished into Crowley's operation like stones dropped into deep water. Did anyone else see them? Visitors? Delivery men? Crowley didn't allow visitors inside the house. When tradesmen came, we had to stay in the back rooms or the cellar, out of sight. Wren's expression darkened. He said it was because we were too stupid and too ugly to be seen, that we'd embarrass him. That's not true. You know that, right? I know, but it didn't matter what was true. It only mattered what he could make us believe. The wisdom in that statement, the terrible earned understanding of how power worked, made Clay's chest ache. No child should know these things. No child should have to learn survival by parsing the difference between truth and weaponized lies. "Wren," he said carefully, "if we could find Henry or Thomas, if we could prove what happened to Sarah and Rebecca, would you be willing to testify about all of it, in front of a judge and a courtroom full of people?" She met his eyes without flinching. If it means Crowley can't hurt anyone else? Yes. It won't be easy. His lawyers will ask hard questions, try to make you seem confused or dishonest. They'll bring up things that hurt to remember. I remember anyway. Every day, every night. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. At least if I testify, the remembering means something. Clay crouched down so they were eye level. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You know that? Wren's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time. That's what brave is, being scared and doing the thing anyway. Nay, she considered this, then nodded slowly. Okay, then I'll be brave. That afternoon, Eli returned with news that was both encouraging and troubling. He'd found a farrier named Dutch McKenna who'd shod horses at Crowley's ranch on a monthly basis for 2 years. Dutch had noticed things, children who appeared and disappeared, locked doors in the main house, sounds that didn't sit right. He was willing to testify, though he was nervous about it. He's got a wife and 3 kids, Eli said, owns his smithy outright, so Crowley can't threaten his livelihood directly. But he's worried about retaliation, asked if we could guarantee protection. Can we? Clay asked. Not the kind he's hoping for. Best we can do is make sure his testimony gets heard and hope the truth carries enough weight to shield him afterward. It's not much of a guarantee. No, Eli agreed. But it's all we've got. They also learned that Dr. Hollis wasn't the only physician who'd had dealings with Crowley. An older doctor named Samuel Garrett had made house calls to the ranch 3 years prior before Crowley abruptly stopped requesting medical services. May tracked Garrett down to his home on the edge of town, a small house with a tidy garden and the quiet air of semi-retirement. She returned that evening with a grim expression. Garrett saw 2 children during his visits. Both had injuries he found suspicious: burns, fractures, bruising inconsistent with the accidents Crowley claimed caused them. He documented his concerns in his personal records and recommended contacting the territorial authorities. What happened? Crowley paid him a visit, told him his services were no longer needed, and suggested very strongly that his medical records contained errors that should be corrected. Garrett refused. 2 weeks later, his office was broken into. His records were stolen. Nothing else, just the files. Clay's jaw tightened. Will he testify? He wants to. Says he's regretted his silence for 3 years. But he's 74, Clay. Frail. If Crowley's lawyers come at him hard, I'm not sure he'll hold up under the pressure. It's still evidence, still a pattern, another piece of the picture. May nodded, but her expression remained troubled. We're building a case out of whispers and implications. What we need is something concrete. Physical evidence. Documentation that can't be explained away. Clay knew she was right. Testimony was powerful, but testimony could be discredited. What they needed was proof so undeniable that even Crowley's money and influence couldn't bury it. That night, he sat up late with Nora, asking her about Crowley's ranch, the layout, the routines, where he might keep records or documents. Nora was hesitant at first, her hands trembling around her coffee cup, but gradually she opened up. He has an office, she said, in the main house. 2nd floor, northeast corner. He keeps it locked. Only he has the key. What's in there? I don't know for certain. I only saw inside once when he left the door open while retrieving something. There were ledgers, files, a lockbox on the desk. She paused. He was meticulous about records, everything documented. I always thought it was strange. Why keep such careful records of something you're trying to hide? Control, Clay said. Men like Crowley need to feel in control. Documentation is proof of ownership, proof of order, even when the thing they're documenting is monstrous. You think there's evidence in that office? Proof of what he did to the children? I think if he's been taking children for years through official channels, there have to be records, placement documents, correspondence, something that shows the pattern. Nora's eyes widened. You're not thinking of breaking in. I'm thinking we're running out of time and options. If the evidence exists, we need it, and Crowley's not going to hand it over willingly. He'll have guards, men loyal to him. If you're caught, then we'd better not get caught. Eli, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. You're serious about this. I'm serious about winning, about keeping Wren safe. If that means taking risks, I'll take them. Then you won't be going alone. I'm in. Eli, don't argue. You need someone watching your back, and I'm the best you've got for the job. Besides, someone's got to keep you from doing something stupidly heroic. Clay wanted to protest, wanted to keep his friend out of danger, but he knew Eli was right. Going alone was a death wish. Going with backup at least improved the odds from impossible to merely terrible. All right, he said, but we do this smart. We plan every detail, scout the location, wait for the right moment. No rushing in blind. Agreed. So when do we scout? Tomorrow night. Just a look. See what we're dealing with. Then we decide if it's even possible. May, who'd been silent up to this point, spoke quietly from her chair by the window. If you two get yourselves killed, I'll be very put out. We'll do our best to avoid that, Clay said. See that you do. Wren's already lost everyone she loved. She doesn't need to lose you too. The words hit harder than May probably intended. Clay glanced toward the bedroom where Wren slept. This child who'd stumbled into his life carrying grief and trauma like stones in her pockets. He'd promised to keep her safe, made that promise knowing he might not be able to keep it. But standing there in the lamplight with his friends around him, Clay realized it didn't matter whether he could or couldn't. What mattered was that he'd try. That he'd stake everything he had left on a girl who deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. I won't let her down, he said quietly. Not this time. The next night, Clay and Eli rode north under a sliver moon, following the route Wren had walked in reverse. The land unfolded in shades of silver and shadow, familiar shapes made strange by darkness. They moved slowly, keeping to low ground where possible, pausing often to listen for sounds that didn't belong. Crowley's ranch appeared around midnight, sprawling across a wide valley like a small town. The main house stood 3 stories tall, imposing even in darkness. Barns, outbuildings, corrals, all of it spoke to wealth and power. Lights burned in several windows despite the late hour. They tied their horses a half-mile out and approached on foot, using the cover of scrub brush and irrigation ditches. Close enough to observe, far enough to run if things went wrong. Clay counted 6 men on patrol, more security than any honest operation needed. They moved in patterns overlapping their routes to eliminate blind spots. Professional, Eli murmured. Military training, maybe? Or at least someone who knows what they're doing. Clay nodded. The office Nora had described was on the 2nd floor, a window visible from their position. Dark now, but the glass reflected moonlight in a way that suggested it was intact and locked. Getting in won't be easy, Eli said. No, but it's not impossible. We'd need a distraction, something to pull the guards away from the house long enough to get inside and out again. And then we'd need to crack the lock on that office, find what we're looking for, and escape before anyone notices we were there. Like I said, not impossible. Just extremely difficult and likely to get us killed. Eli smiled faintly. Well, when you put it that way. They watched for another hour, noting the guards' movements, the layout of the grounds, the best entry and exit points. By the time they withdrew, Clay had the beginnings of a plan, rough and dangerous, but feasible if they timed everything perfectly and caught a lucky break. The ride back was quiet, both men lost in thought. As they approached Clay's ranch, dawn was beginning to gray the eastern horizon. Eli broke the silence first. You know this could go wrong in about 100 different ways. I know. And if it does, Wren loses her best chance at justice. We get arrested or killed, and Crowley walks free. I know that too. So why risk it? Clay was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because sometimes the safe play is the wrong play. Because waiting for the law to fix this means trusting a system that's already failed Wren and every other child Crowley hurt. Because I've spent 3 years playing it safe, keeping my head down, not getting involved, and all it got me was an empty house and a guilty conscience. He looked at Eli. I can't do that again. Can't look at that girl and tell her I did everything I could when I know I left something on the table because it was too risky or too hard. Eli studied him in the growing light. Margaret would be proud of you. You know that? The mention of his wife hit Clay like a fist to the chest, unexpected and devastating. He swallowed hard. Margaret would tell me I'm being an idiot and risking my neck for nothing. Maybe, but she'd also tell you it was the right kind of idiocy, the kind that matters. They reached the ranch as full daylight broke across the valley. May was already up making coffee in the kitchen. She took one look at their faces and poured 2 extra cups without asking. "Well?" she said. "It's possible," Clay said. "Barely. We'd need perfect timing, a lot of luck, and nerves made of iron, but it's possible." "When?" 3 days. Give us time to prepare, gather supplies, make sure everyone knows their role. The night before we're supposed to hand over our evidence to Danner, we go in. If we find something, it strengthens our case. If we don't, he shrugged. At least we tried. May set down her cup with a sharp clink. "I don't like it." "I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to trust me." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Don't make me regret it." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Clay and Eli gathered tools, rope, a pry bar, dark clothing, oil for hinges. They mapped out routes and contingencies, rehearsing the plan until they could execute it in their sleep. May kept Wren and Nora occupied and away from the details, understanding that some burdens shouldn't be shared with those already carrying too much weight. On the second day, Dutch McKenna came by the ranch, ostensibly to check a loose shoe on one of Clay's horses, actually to confirm he was still willing to testify. He was a big man with scarred hands and a cautious demeanor, the kind of person who'd learned to read situations before committing. "I talked to my wife," he said, working the shoe with practiced efficiency. "Told her what I saw at Crowley's place, what I suspect happened to those children. She said if I didn't speak up, she'd never forgive me. Said our kids deserve to grow up in a world where people stood against evil, even when it was hard." "Smart woman," Clay said. "Smarter than me, that's certain." Dutch straightened, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'll testify. But I want your word you'll do everything you can to make it count. I'm putting my family on the line here. Don't waste it." "You have my word." Dutch nodded and left without another word, but the set of his shoulders suggested a man who'd made peace with his decision, whatever the cost. That evening, Dr. Garrett stopped by with May. The old physician looked frail in the lamplight, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted coffee. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "I've written out everything I remember from my time treating children at Crowley's ranch. Dates, injuries, my professional opinions about the causes. It's not much, but it's accurate, and it's sworn testimony." He handed Clay a sheaf of papers covered in careful script. "I should have done this 3 years ago, should have fought harder. I let fear make me complicit." "You're fighting now," Clay said. "That's what matters. I hope the judge sees it that way. I hope—" Garrett's voice cracked. "I hope those children know someone finally tried to speak for them." After he left, Clay sat at the kitchen table reading through Garrett's testimony. The details were damning. Fractures inconsistent with falls, burns suggesting deliberate infliction, malnutrition in children who should have been well fed. Each entry was clinical, precise, and devastating. It still wasn't enough. Not against Crowley's lawyers and influence. But combined with everything else, with Wren's testimony, Nora's eyewitness account, Dutch's observations, it was starting to build into something that might, possibly, stand a chance. If they could add physical evidence to the pile. Documents, records, proof that couldn't be explained away. On the third night, Clay tucked Wren into bed and sat with her until she fell asleep. She'd been quiet all day, sensing something was building even if she didn't know what. Before her eyes closed, she'd grabbed his hand. "You're going to do something dangerous," she said. "What makes you think that?" "Because you have the same look my sister got before she tried to steal food from Crowley's kitchen. Like you know it's risky, but you're going to do it anyway because it matters more than safety." Clay couldn't lie to her. "Yes, I'm going to try to find evidence that helps our case. It's risky, but I'll be careful." "Promise?" "I promise." She held his hand tighter. "My sister made me promise before she tried to get food. She said if she didn't come back, I should run, find help, save myself." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I promised. And then she didn't come back. Crowley caught her and—" She couldn't finish. Clay pulled her close, letting her cry against his shirt. "I'm coming back, Wren. I swear it. You're not losing anyone else." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." He stayed until her breathing evened into sleep, then slipped out quietly. Eli was waiting in the kitchen, dressed in dark clothes and checking his rifle one last time. May stood by the stove, her expression tight with worry. "Be smart," she said. "Be careful. And if it goes wrong, run. The evidence isn't worth your lives." "Yes, it is," Clay said quietly, "because without it, Wren goes back to that monster, and I won't let that happen." May's eyes glistened, but she didn't argue, just stepped forward and hugged him, brief and fierce. "Come back," she whispered. "Both of you." Then Clay and Eli rode into the darkness toward Crowley's ranch and whatever waited there. The moon was darker tonight, providing better cover. The air smelled like sage and distant rain, and with every mile Clay felt the weight of what they were about to do settling over him like a mantle. This was the turning point, the moment when they stopped reacting and started acting, when they took the fight to Crowley instead of waiting for him to come to them. Whatever happened next would determine everything. For Wren, for justice, for the children who'd vanished into Crowley's operation and never came home. Clay touched the rifle at his side and urged his horse forward. Behind him, Eli followed without hesitation. And ahead, in the darkness, Crowley's ranch waited like a question that demanded an answer written in courage and desperation and the kind of hope that refused to die even when common sense said it should. They were two men riding toward impossible odds, but they were riding together, and sometimes, Clay thought, that was enough to tip the balance between failure and a fighting chance. The approach to Crowley's ranch felt different this time, not reconnaissance, but commitment, the kind of forward motion that couldn't be undone. Clay and Eli left their horses tied in the same spot as before, hidden in a depression where scrub brush grew thick enough to provide cover. The animals knew to stay quiet, trained by years of work that sometimes required stealth. The ranch spread before them in the darkness like a sleeping beast, deceptively peaceful. Lights still burned in a few windows, and the patrol patterns they'd observed 3 nights ago remained consistent. 6 men moving in overlapping routes that covered the main approaches. Professional. Thorough. Exactly the kind of security a man used when he had something worth hiding. Clay checked his pocket watch. midnight. They'd timed their arrival for the gap between patrol shifts, that brief window when guards were tired and attention wandered. Not much of an advantage, but enough to matter if they moved fast and stayed quiet. "Ready?" Eli whispered. Clay nodded. They'd gone over the plan a dozen times, refined it until the steps felt like muscle memory. Eli would create the distraction, a small fire in the hay barn on the south end of the property, far enough from the main house to pull guards away, but controlled enough not to spread and kill livestock. While the guards scrambled to contain it, Clay would slip into the main house through a kitchen window Nora had described, make his way to Crowley's office, find whatever evidence existed, and get out before anyone noticed the intrusion. Simple in theory, deadly if anything went wrong. They moved through the darkness using hand signals, communicating in the language of men who'd worked together long enough to anticipate each other's thoughts. Eli peeled off toward the barn while Clay circled wide, keeping to the irrigation ditches and fence lines where shadows pooled deepest. The main house loomed closer with each step. Clay could see details now, the ornate trim on the windows, the expensive construction that spoke to wealth built on others' suffering. Somewhere in that building were the records that would prove what Crowley had done. Documents that would give names and dates to the children who'd disappeared, create a pattern too obvious to ignore. He reached the east wall and pressed against it, listening. No sounds of alarm. No indication anyone had spotted him. Through a window above, he could see lamplight flickering, someone still awake. He'd have to be careful, move through the house like smoke, leave no trace of his passage. Across the compound, orange light suddenly bloomed. Eli's fire, catching hold exactly as planned. Shouts erupted from the bunkhouse. Men poured out, running toward the flames with buckets and blankets. The guards on patrol abandoned their routes and converged on the burning barn. Clay moved. The kitchen window was latched but not locked, exactly as Nora had said. He slipped a thin blade between the frames and lifted the catch, eased the window open inch by careful inch. The hinges were old but well-oiled, opening without sound. He pulled himself through and dropped into the kitchen, landing on the balls of his feet. The room smelled like bread and old coffee. Moonlight through the windows provided just enough illumination to navigate. Clay crossed to the doorway and paused, listening to the house breathe around him. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards creaked. He waited, counting heartbeats, until the sound faded. The stairs were his greatest risk, old wood that might groan under weight, exposing his presence to anyone listening. He took them slowly, testing each step before committing his full weight, keeping to the edges where boards were less likely to protest. It felt like climbing through molasses, every second stretched thin with tension. Second floor. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with closed doors. Northeast corner, Nora had said. He moved left, counting doors until he reached the one that matched her description. A sliver of light showed beneath it. Someone was inside. Clay's hand went to the knife at his belt. This wasn't part of the plan. The office was supposed to be empty, Crowley occupied with the fire outside. But the light said otherwise, and Clay had to make a choice: abort and retreat, or push forward and deal with whoever waited beyond that door. He thought of Wren, of her sister dying in darkness, of children who'd vanished without trace or justice. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. He turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open. Crowley sat behind a massive oak desk, a ledger open before him and a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up as Clay entered, and for a moment neither man moved. Then Crowley's hand drifted toward the desk drawer where a gun likely waited. "I wouldn't," Clay said quietly, his own pistol now drawn and leveled. Crowley's hand stopped. His expression shifted from surprise to calculation to something almost like amusement. "Mr. Mercer, I must say this is unexpected. Breaking into a man's home in the middle of the night? That's a serious crime. So is murdering children. Strong words. Do you have proof?" "That's why I'm here. To find it." Crowley leaned back in his chair, utterly calm despite the gun pointed at his chest. "You won't find anything incriminating in this office. I'm a careful man, Mr. Mercer. Meticulous. Every transaction documented, every placement logged and verified through proper channels. If you're looking for evidence of wrongdoing, you'll be disappointed. Then you won't mind if I look." "Actually, I mind quite a bit. This is private property, my property, and you're trespassing." Outside, the shouts were getting louder. Someone had noticed the fire was contained, deliberately set. Soon they'd start searching for whoever had started it. Clay's window was closing fast. "Step away from the desk," he said. Crowley didn't move. "Or what? You'll shoot me? In my own home? Even if you found evidence, you'd hang for murder. Is that worth it?" "Maybe. Maybe seeing you dead is worth whatever comes after." For the first time, something flickered in Crowley's eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition that Clay meant what he said. He rose slowly, hands visible, and moved to the side. "You're making a terrible mistake." Clay crossed to the desk, keeping the gun trained on Crowley while he rifled through papers with his free hand. Ledgers, correspondence, bills of sale. Everything neat and organized exactly as Crowley had promised, but nothing that screamed guilt, nothing that proved. His hand found a locked drawer, small, built into the desk's interior, the kind of place a man kept secrets. "The key," Clay said. "I don't have it." Clay cocked the pistol. "Try again." Crowley's jaw tightened. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, he reached into his vest pocket and produced a small brass key. "This won't help you. Whatever you think you'll find, shut up and step back." Clay took the key and opened the drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with handwritten entries. He flipped it open, scanning the contents by lamplight. Names, dates, children's names with arrival dates, placement fees, notations about work assignments, and beside some of the names, a single word that made Clay's blood run cold: disposed. Sarah Michaels, disposed. March 1885. Rebecca Norton, disposed. April 1885. Thomas Yates, disposed. September 1886. The list went on. 12 children over 4 years. 12 lives reduced to a single word in a ledger. "This is your record," Clay said, his voice shaking. "Your accounting of murder." Crowley's expression remained utterly flat. "That's a matter of interpretation. Those children were problematic, unmanageable. They ran away or fell ill or had accidents. I simply documented their departures. You killed them. I managed a difficult situation. Some children couldn't be saved, Mr. Mercer. They were too damaged, too broken. I gave them chances, and they squandered them. The casual way he said it, the complete absence of remorse or recognition that these were human lives, made Clay's finger tighten on the trigger. It would be so easy. One shot, end this monster and damn the consequences. But Wren's face flashed in his mind. If he killed Crowley now, he'd hang, and Wren would lose the one person who'd promised to protect her. She'd end up in another placement, another system that had already failed her once. Clay lowered the gun slightly and grabbed the journal. This is coming with me. That won't stand up in court. It's my private record. You obtained it illegally. Then I guess we'll see what a judge thinks about illegal evidence versus dead children. Footsteps pounded in the hallway. Multiple men, moving fast. Crowley's expression shifted to triumph. My men heard the commotion. You're trapped, Mercer. Surrender now, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to stand trial. Clay glanced at the window. Second story, but there was a porch roof below. Risky, but possible. He backed toward it, journal clutched in one hand, gun steady in the other. Don't follow me, he said. Crowley smiled. I don't have to. There's nowhere for you to run. Clay fired, not at Crowley, but at the lamp on the desk. Oil sprayed across the wood and ignited, flames catching fast. Crowley stumbled back with a shout. Clay turned and dove through the window, glass shattering around him. He hit the porch roof hard, rolled to absorb the impact, and slid toward the edge. Voices erupted behind him, shots cracked through the night, bullets punching holes in the roof tiles. Clay dropped off the edge, landed in a crouch in the yard, and ran. The compound was chaos now, men running in all directions, the office window belching smoke and flame, Eli's barn fire still drawing attention on the south side. Clay sprinted toward the fence line, lungs burning, legs pumping. More shots. Something tugged at his sleeve, hot and close. He vaulted a fence, stumbled, caught himself, kept running. He found Eli at the horses, already mounted and holding Clay's reins. Go, go, go! They rode hard into the darkness, hooves thundering across open ground. Behind them, the shouting grew distant, but didn't stop. Crowley would send men after them, would hunt them across every mile between his ranch and Clay's. But they had the journal. They had proof. They rode for an hour before slowing, letting the horses breathe. Eli glanced at Clay, taking in the torn sleeve and wild expression. You got it? Clay pulled the journal from his coat and held it up. Even in the darkness, it seemed to pulse with significance, a record of horrors that would finally see daylight. Yeah, he said. I got it. They reached Clay's ranch just before dawn, exhausted and running on nothing but adrenaline and the knowledge that they'd crossed a line there was no uncrossing. May met them at the door, her face drawn with worry that melted into relief when she saw them alive. The fire? She asked. Controlled. No one hurt, Eli said. But they know we were there. They'll be coming. Clay handed May the journal. She opened it, read the first few entries, and her expression went from relief to horror to cold fury. This is monstrous. It's also admissible evidence, Crowley's own handwriting, his own records. He documented every child he killed. He'll claim it was stolen, that it's inadmissible. Maybe. But once people read this, once they see the names and dates, they won't be able to pretend anymore. The whole county will know what he is. May closed the journal carefully, like it was something sacred. We need to get this to Sheriff Danner immediately, before Crowley can spin the narrative or destroy other evidence. Agreed. But first, Clay looked toward the bedroom where Wren slept. I need to check on her. He found Wren awake, sitting up in bed with the quilt pulled around her shoulders. She looked at him with those two old eyes and didn't ask questions, just waited. I found evidence, Clay said. Records of what Crowley did to you, to Lark, to the others. The others? Clay hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. There were 12, over 4 years. Children who came to his ranch and never left. Wren's face crumpled. 12? Yes, I'm sorry. I know it's hard to hear. My sister, Wren whispered. She wasn't the first. No, and you would have been next if you hadn't run. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, What happens now? Now we take this to the sheriff. Make sure everyone knows what Crowley is. Make sure he can never hurt another child. He'll fight. Let him. We have the truth on our side now. Wren reached out and took Clay's hand. Her grip was small but fierce. Thank you for not giving up, for fighting when everyone else just looked away. Clay squeezed back. I should have fought sooner, should have questioned why children kept disappearing, should have... You're fighting now, that's what matters. Her words echoed what he'd told Dr. Garrett. The idea that redemption came not from undoing past failures, but from choosing different actions in the present. Clay wanted to believe it, wanted to think that what he'd done tonight, risking everything to steal evidence from a monster, balanced some cosmic scale. But looking at Wren's face, seeing the weight she carried, he knew the truth. Nothing balanced the scales. You just did what you could with the time you had left and hoped it was enough. Get some rest, he said. We've got a hard day ahead. Will you be here? When I wake up? I'll be here. She nodded and lay back down, but her hand didn't release his until sleep finally claimed her. Clay sat with her until the sun broke over the ridge, golden light spilling through the window and illuminating the room in shades of hope and exhaustion. Sheriff Danner arrived at mid-morning, his face grave. Clay had sent word at first light, asking him to come alone. The lawman stood in Clay's kitchen now, the journal open on the table between them, reading entry after entry with an expression that grew darker with each page. Jesus Christ, Danner breathed. Jesus Christ, Clay, this is evidence of mass murder. That's what I'm saying. 12 children, all documented, all killed on Crowley's property. And you obtained this how? Clay met his gaze without flinching. I broke into his ranch last night and took it from his office. Danner closed his eyes. You realize what you've done? Breaking and entering. Theft. This evidence is tainted. A defense lawyer will get it thrown out before trial even starts. Maybe. But people need to see what's in there, need to know what Crowley is. The law doesn't work that way, you know that. The law hasn't worked at all. That's why I did what I did. Danner was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. You've put me in an impossible position. By rights, I should arrest you for burglary. But if I do that, this evidence disappears and Crowley walks free. He looked at Clay with something between admiration and frustration. You're either the bravest man I know or the most foolish. Can't it be both? The ghost of a smile touched Danner's lips, then faded. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking this journal as evidence in an ongoing investigation. I'll testify that you brought it to me voluntarily, claiming you found it on your property, which isn't technically a lie, since your property is where I'm receiving it. That might possibly give us enough legal cover to use it in court. And if it doesn't, then we're both finished, but at least we tried. Danner stood, tucking the journal into his coat. Crowley's going to come for you, Clay, probably today. He'll claim you assaulted him, burned his property, stole his records. He'll have witnesses and lawyers and every advantage money can buy. Let him come. I'm not backing down. I know, that's what worries me. Danner moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth. I'm glad someone finally had the guts to stand up to him, even if it means we're both probably going to regret it. After Danner left, the waiting began. Clay knew Crowley would respond. The only question was how and when. May insisted on staying at the ranch, claiming she wouldn't leave Wren vulnerable. Eli positioned men around the property, armed and watchful. Dutch McKenna sent word that he'd heard about the fire at Crowley's place and assumed Clay was involved, but he was still willing to testify regardless. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Every sound made Clay's hand drift toward his rifle. Every distant dust cloud on the horizon pulled his attention. But Crowley didn't come. Not at noon. Not at sunset. Not as darkness fell again, and the ranch settled into tense silence. Maybe he's regrouping, Eli suggested over dinner, planning his next move. Or maybe he's talking to his lawyers, May said, figuring out how to spin this. Clay pushed food around his plate without eating. He burned his own office last night, destroyed who knows what other evidence in the process. That's the act of a desperate man. Desperate men are dangerous, Wren said quietly. Everyone looked at her, She met their gazes without flinching. When Mr. Crowley realized Lark was getting sicker, he didn't get help. He got angry, started blaming her, said she was doing it on purpose to cost him money. That's when he locked us both in the cellar. She paused. Desperate men don't think straight. They just lash out. Her words settled over the table like a prediction. Clay reached across and squeezed her hand. We're ready for him. Whatever he does, we're ready. Are we? Wren asked. Because he's not just one man. He's got money and power and people who do what he says because they're scared not to. How do you fight that? By being more stubborn than he is ruthless. By refusing to quit even when it's easier to give up. Clay met her eyes. You did that, Wren. You walked 60 miles because giving up meant dying. You showed me what real courage looks like. I was just trying to survive. That's what courage is. Surviving when everything says you shouldn't. Fighting when the odds are impossible. Believing tomorrow might be better even when today is hell. Wren's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. And if tomorrow isn't better? Then we fight for the day after that. And the one after that. Until we run out of days or the fight is won. That night, Clay did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to the ridge where Margaret and their son were buried and sat between the headstones, watching stars wheel overhead. I don't know if you're listening, he said to the darkness. Don't know if you can hear me or if there's anything after this but silence. But I need to tell you something. He paused, gathering words. I failed you. Failed to save you. Failed to give our son a chance at life. I've carried that for 3 years. Let it hollow me out until I was barely living myself. The wind sighed through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. But there's a girl down there who needs someone to fight for her, who's been failed by every adult who should have protected her. And I won't let that happen again. So I'm fighting, even if it costs everything, even if I lose, because maybe that's how you make up for past failures, not by undoing them, but by making sure they don't repeat. He sat in silence for a while longer, then stood and brushed off his pants. I hope you understand. Hope you'd approve. But even if you don't, I'm doing this anyway. Because it's right, and because someone has to. Walking back down the ridge, Clay felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly. The wounds Margaret and their son left were too deep for that. But maybe acceptance. Maybe the recognition that carrying grief didn't mean surrendering to it. That you could honor the dead by fighting for the living. The house lights glowed warm in the darkness. Through the kitchen window, he could see May and Wren washing dishes, talking quietly. Eli stood on the porch, rifle cradled, keeping watch. His family, Clay realized. Not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd found in the wreckage. Different, imperfect, held together by necessity and choice rather than blood. But family nonetheless. He was halfway to the house when he heard it. The sound of many horses, moving fast, coming from the north. Eli! Clay shouted, breaking into a run. We've got company! Eli turned, rifle coming up. May appeared in the doorway, pulling Wren behind her. The ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, armed and ready. Everyone had known this moment was coming. Now it was here. The riders appeared over the ridge, at least a dozen, maybe more. They came in a loose formation that suggested experience, men who knew how to fight, and weren't afraid of it. At their head rode Crowley, his face a mask of cold fury. They stopped 20 yards from the house, fanning out to surround the buildings. Clay stepped off the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. Not yet. Crowley urged his horse forward a few steps. Last chance, Mercer. Give me back what you stole and I'll let you walk away from this. Keep it and you'll burn with everything you love. I don't have what you're looking for, Clay said calmly. Gave it to the sheriff this morning. It's evidence now. Public record. Crowley's jaw tightened. You think that matters? I own the judge, own half the jury pool. That journal will disappear before trial, and you'll hang for breaking into my home and assaulting me. Maybe. But everyone will know what you are, what you did to those children. You can buy lawyers and judges, but you can't buy back your reputation once the truth is out. The truth is what people believe, and I'll make them believe you're a liar and a criminal who broke into a respectable man's home and stole fabricated evidence. Then why are you here? If you're so confident the law will handle this, why bring an army to my door? Crowley smiled, cold and dead. Because some problems require direct solutions. Because I'm tired of pretending to be civilized with people who don't appreciate it. He raised his hand. Burn it. The house, the barn, everything. Leave nothing standing. His men reached for torches, and Clay raised his rifle. Touch those buildings, and people will die, starting with you. You can't kill us all, Mercer. No, but I can kill you, and that'll be enough. For a moment, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Everyone armed, everyone ready, waiting for the first shot that would turn talk into slaughter. The air felt thick, charged with violence held barely in check. Then new sounds. More horses, coming fast from multiple directions. Crowley's men turned, confused. From the east came riders. Townspeople Clay recognized, farmers and shopkeepers and ordinary people who'd decided fear cost too much. From the south came more, including Dutch McKenna on his big draft horse, bringing half the men from the livery stable. And from the west, moving with surprising speed, came a buckboard driven by Dr. Garrett with May's medical colleagues from Cheyenne. They formed a rough circle around Crowley's men, outnumbering them 2-1. At their head rode Reverend Jonah Cade, the stern-faced minister who'd buried more than his share of the county's dead and was tired of officiating funerals for children. "That's far enough, Crowley," Cade called out. "We know what you are, we know what you've done, and we're here to make sure you don't do it again." Crowley looked around at the assembled crowd, his expression shifting from confidence to calculation. "This is trespassing, harassment. I'll have every one of you arrested." We'll take our chances," Dutch said. "Already lost too many to your kind of justice. Time someone stood up." "You think you can intimidate me with numbers? I have lawyers, resources, power. And we have the truth," Cade said quietly, "which is worth more than all your money when the scales finally balance." Crowley's hand moved toward his gun. Every weapon in the yard tracked the motion. One move, and this turned into a bloodbath. Clay could feel the weight of it, dozens of lives hanging on whether a cruel man chose pride over survival. Then Sheriff Danner rode into the circle, his badge catching lamplight from the house. "Nobody moves," he commanded. "Nobody draws. This ends without blood if we all keep our heads." "Sheriff," Crowley said, "arrest these people. They're threatening me on my own property. We're on Mercer's land, actually, and I'm here to arrest you, Silas, for the murder of 12 children and the attempted murder of Wren Ashby." "On what evidence? A stolen journal and the testimony of a lying child?" "On evidence provided by Mr. Mercer. On testimony from Dr. Hollis, Dr. Garrett, Nora Vance, and others. On a pattern of behavior that's been ignored too long." Danner's voice hardened. "You're done, Crowley. Whether you come peaceful or in chains is up to you." Crowley's face twisted with rage. His hand dropped to his gun. Fast, practiced. But Clay was faster. His rifle cracked once, and Crowley's weapon flew from his hand before he could clear leather. The man cried out, gripping his wrist where the bullet had creased it. "Next one goes through your chest," Clay said flatly. Danner rode forward and dismounted, pulling Crowley from his saddle. The rancher struggled, but the sheriff wrestled him down and snapped cuffs on his wrists with hands that shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally doing what should have been done years ago. "Silas Crowley," Danner said formally, "you're under arrest for murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy. You have the right to face your accusers in a court of law." Crowley spat at him. "You'll regret this, all of you. I'll destroy you from inside a cell if I have to." "Maybe," Danner said, "but at least you'll be in that cell. And the children you can't hurt anymore will finally get justice." He hauled Crowley toward his horse. The rancher's men looked at each other, calculating odds. Then, one by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Without Crowley's money backing them, they were just hired guns with no stomach for a fight they couldn't win. The tension bled out of the yard slowly, like water from a cracked barrel. People lowered weapons, started talking in low, relieved voices. Someone laughed, nervous energy finding release. Clay felt his knees go weak and locked them, refusing to show the toll the confrontation had taken. Wren appeared beside him, having slipped away from May. She looked up at Crowley as Danner led him past, and her expression was complicated. Relief and grief and anger all mixed together. "Is it over?" she asked. Clay looked at the arrested man, the assembled crowd. the evidence that would soon be public record. The fight is. The healing? That's just starting. Crowley turned his head and locked eyes with Wren. You'll pay for this, girl. One way or another, you'll... That's enough, Danner snapped, shoving him forward. One more word, and I'll add threatening a witness to your charges. They watched as Crowley was loaded onto a horse and led away, surrounded by armed men who'd make sure he reached jail intact. His ranch hands were rounded up for questioning. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their homes with the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted in their county. Reverend Cade approached Clay, extending his hand. You did a good thing here, a hard thing. Not many would have had the courage. I didn't do it alone, Clay said, shaking the offered hand. Wouldn't have been possible without all of you. Maybe, but you started it. You took the first step when everyone else was too scared. Cade glanced at Wren. Take care of her. She's going to need time to trust that this is real. I will. After everyone left, the ranch settled into exhausted quiet. May tended to Clay's torn sleeve. The bullet had come closer than he'd realized, grazing skin, but doing no real damage. Eli checked the property, making sure nothing had been damaged in the standoff. And Wren sat on the porch steps staring at the stars with an expression Clay couldn't quite read. He sat beside her, not speaking, just being present. After a while, she leaned against him. I keep waiting for it to feel different, she said, like something should have changed inside me when they took him away. But I still feel, she struggled for words, broken, like the pieces don't fit right anymore. They don't, Clay said gently, and maybe they never will. Not completely, but broken doesn't mean useless, Wren. It just means you're made of pieces that had to survive being shattered. That takes strength most people never have to find. I don't feel strong. You walked 60 miles barefoot in summer heat because the alternative was death. You testified about horrors most people can't even imagine. You survived when survival should have been impossible. He looked at her. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. She was quiet for a moment, then, what happens now? To me, I mean. Do I go back to the orphanage? Get sent to another placement? Clay had been thinking about this since the moment Danner arrested Crowley. Thinking about what came next, what he could offer, whether he had any right to ask. What if you didn't? What if you stayed here? Wren looked up at him, eyes wide. Stay? With you? If you want to. I know I'm not much. Just a rancher with a half-empty house and more grief than sense. But, he took a breath, but I could give you a home. A real one. Safe. Permanent. If you're willing to take a chance on someone who's still figuring out how to live again. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You mean that? Every word. She threw her arms around him, clinging tight. Yes. Yes, I want to stay. I want... Her voice broke. I want to stop running. Clay held her, feeling something in his chest crack open, not breaking, but opening, making room for this fierce, damaged, impossibly brave child who'd walked through hell and somehow come out the other side still believing in the possibility of home. Then you'll stay, he said, for as long as you want. This is your home now, Wren. Yours. They sat there while the stars wheeled overhead and the night breathed around them, two survivors finding something in the wreckage that looked almost like family. It wasn't healing, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, too deep. But it was a start. And sometimes, Clay thought, a start was all you needed. The days following Crowley's arrest moved with a strange, dreamlike quality, events unfolding with an inevitability that felt both terrifying and necessary. Clay woke each morning half expecting to find it had all been wishful thinking, that Wren would be gone and Crowley would appear on the horizon with lawyers and guns. But each morning brought reality instead. Wren at the breakfast table, May brewing coffee in the kitchen, Eli checking fence lines like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. The trial date was set for 3 weeks out, enough time for both sides to prepare, but not so long that witnesses could be intimidated or evidence could disappear. Sheriff Danner kept Crowley locked in the county jail under guard, rotating deputies to prevent any chance of bribery or escape. The ranchers' lawyers descended like vultures, expensive suits from Denver and Cheyenne, men with sharp eyes and sharper tongues who made it clear they intended to shred every witness and discredit every piece of evidence. Clay met with them once, when they came to serve papers claiming he'd illegally obtained the journal and demanding its return. He stood on his porch and listened to their threats about prosecution for burglary, their insinuations about his fitness as a guardian, their barely veiled suggestions that things would go easier if he simply admitted the evidence was fabricated. "Are you finished?" Clay asked when they finally paused for breath. The lead lawyer, a hawk-faced man named Thornton, smiled without warmth. "We're prepared to be very thorough in destroying your credibility, Mr. Mercer. Your dead wife, your failed ranch, your history of isolation and depression, all of it will come out in court. The jury will see a desperate man who kidnapped a child and manufactured evidence to justify his actions." "Is that what you're going with? That I kidnapped her?" "The girl was legally bound to Mr. Crowley. You refused to return her despite his documented ownership. That's kidnapping by any legal definition." Clay felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice level. "She's not property. She's a child who was being tortured. According to her testimony, which we will demonstrate is the result of coaching by you and Dr. Hollis, a traumatized child manipulated by adults with an agenda." Thornton's smile widened. "We'll make the jury see her as a victim, not of Mr. Crowley, but of you. You do what you have to do, so will we. Then I'll see you in court, Mr. Mercer. I promise it won't be pleasant." After they left, Clay found Wren sitting in the kitchen with May, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She'd heard everything. The walls weren't thick enough to hide raised voices. "They're going to say I'm lying," she said quietly. "That you made me say those things." "Yes, that's their job, to create doubt, make the jury question everything. What if it works? What if people believe them?" Clay pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Then we lose. Crowley goes free by ROC, and I probably go to jail for burglary and kidnapping. But Wren, listen to me. That doesn't change the truth. You were hurt. Your sister died. Those things happened regardless of what a jury decides. But if they don't believe me, then we tried. We stood up and told the truth, even when it was hard and scary. That matters, even if the outcome isn't what we hope for." May set a hand on Wren's shoulder. "The truth has a way of being heard, child. Not always immediately, not always in the way we expect, but eventually it finds its voice." "How do you know?" "Because lies take constant energy to maintain. Truth just sits there, patient and stubborn, waiting for people to stop running from it." Wren absorbed this with the gravity of someone older than her years. "I'm scared." "Good," Clay said. "Fear means you understand what's at stake, means you're taking this seriously, but don't let fear make you doubt yourself. You know what happened. Hold on to that." The next few days brought a parade of visitors, some supportive, others curious, a few openly hostile. Word of Crowley's arrest had spread through the territory like wildfire, and opinions were sharply divided. Those who'd suffered under his influence saw hope for the first time in years. Those who'd benefited from his patronage saw a threat to their comfortable arrangements. Dutch McKenna came by to discuss his testimony, nervous but resolute. "They're saying in town I'm doing this for money, that you paid me to lie about what I saw at Crowley's place." "Did I?" Clay asked. "Hell no, you never offered me a cent." "Then tell the truth. Let them prove otherwise." Dr. Garrett visited as well, his hands shaking worse than before. "I'm not sure I can do this, Clay. Standing up in court being questioned by those lawyers. I'm too old, too tired." "You documented what you saw years ago. That documentation is evidence whether you testify or not. But without my testimony to authenticate it, they'll claim it's fabricated." Clay looked at the old doctor, frail and frightened but still trying. "Samuel, I can't make you testify, can't force you into that courtroom. But I can tell you this. Those children you treated, the ones Crowley hurt, they can't speak for themselves anymore. Someone has to. If not you, then who?" Garrett's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared back then. When he threatened me, when my office was broken into, I convinced myself staying silent was survival. But it wasn't survival, it was cowardice." "Then don't be a coward now. Stand up, tell what you know. Give those children the voice they deserved." The old man nodded slowly. "All right, I'll testify. God help me. I'll testify. Nora Vance was perhaps the most fragile of their witnesses. She'd taken to staying at May's house in town, too frightened to remain alone after hearing that Crowley's ranch hands were asking questions about her. May reported that Nora barely slept, jumping at every sound, convinced that retribution was coming. Clay visited her one evening, finding her in May's sitting room with a cup of tea and haunted eyes. "They're going to destroy me on that stand," she said without preamble. "Point out that I was fired for theft. Make me look like a bitter employee with a grudge." "Were you fired for theft?" "No, I quit. But Crowley put that story around after I left. Easier to discredit someone when you've already poisoned opinion against them." "Then we'll bring evidence that you quit voluntarily. Employment records if they exist, testimony from others who knew you." "And if there's no evidence? If it's just my word against his?" Clay sat down across from her. "Nora, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. They're going to attack your credibility, your character, everything about you. But here's what they can't change. You were there. You saw what happened. And every word you speak is one more crack in Crowley's armor." "What if it's not enough?" "Then at least you spoke. At least you tried. That's more than you did 3 years ago, and it's something you can live with afterward." Nora's hands trembled, but she nodded. "I'll testify. I owe those children that much." As the trial date approached, Clay found himself spending more time with Wren, not preparing her testimony, which May and Sheriff Danner were handling, but just being present. They worked together on small tasks around the ranch, fixing fence and tending horses, the kind of mundane work that created space for conversation without demanding it. One afternoon, while they were mending a section of corral fence, Wren spoke without looking up from the wire she was threading. "Do you think about her? Your wife?" Clay's hand stilled on the fence post. "Every day." "Does it get easier?" "No, it gets different. The sharp edges dull a bit, but the absence never goes away. You just learn to live around it." "I think about Lark like that. Like there's a lark-shaped hole in everything I do. I'll see something pretty and think about showing her, then remember I can't." "That's grief. It doesn't ask permission, just shows up whenever it wants." Wren was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she'd be proud of me for testifying?" "Your sister?" "Yes. For not staying quiet, for fighting back even though I'm scared." Clay set down his tools and turned to face her fully. "Wren, your sister died trying to protect you, trying to get food so you wouldn't starve. Everything she did was about keeping you alive. So yes, I think she'd be proud. I think she'd be grateful that her sacrifice meant something, that you survived and are using that survival to stop others from suffering." Tears streaked down Wren's face. "I miss her so much." "I know, and that's okay. You're allowed to miss her, allowed to grieve. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The lawyers are going to ask about her, about how she died. I'll have to talk about it in front of all those people." "Yes. I don't know if I can." "You don't have to decide right now. When you're on that stand, when the moment comes, you'll know what you can handle. And if you can't get through it, that's okay too. We'll find another way." "But what if my testimony is what makes the difference? What if not saying it means Crowley goes free?" Clay moved closer and put his hands on her shoulders. "Then we lose. But Wren, you are not responsible for the jury's decision. You're not responsible for fixing a system that failed you. All you're responsible for is telling your truth as best you can. The rest? That's on the adults who should have protected you in the first place." She leaned into him, and he held her while she cried, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere vital. He didn't try to quiet her or tell her it would be okay, just held her and let the grief run its course the way May had taught him. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen, but something in her expression had shifted. "I'll do it. I'll testify. For Lark. For the others. For every kid who comes after." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm going to do it anyway." The night before the trial, Clay couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch watching stars wheel overhead, thinking about everything that could go wrong. Crowley's lawyers were good. He'd sat through enough of their depositions to know they were building a comprehensive strategy to discredit every witness, and paint Clay as an unstable vigilante who'd manipulated a traumatized child. The journal was their strongest evidence, but Thornton had already filed motions to have it excluded as illegally obtained. If the judge agreed, their entire case collapsed. Everything would come down to testimony, and testimony could be attacked, twisted, reframed, until truth became uncertain and doubt became reasonable. Can't sleep either? Clay turned to find Eli on the porch steps, rifle across his knees. Figured someone should keep watch, just in case. You think Crowley's people will try something? Desperate men do desperate things. And taking out a few witnesses the night before trial? That'd solve a lot of his problems. Clay hadn't considered this, had been so focused on the legal battle he'd forgotten the possibility of more direct solutions. How many men do we have watching? 4 on rotation, good men. They'll raise alarm if anything moves wrong. They stood in companionable silence for a while. Then Eli spoke again, his voice quiet. You know, when you first told me you were keeping that girl, I thought you were making a mistake. Taking on a fight you couldn't win against a man with too much power. But watching you these past weeks, watching you become someone again, instead of just going through motions, I think maybe she saved you as much as you saved her. Clay considered this. I'm not saved, I'm just less lost. That's a start. Yeah, I suppose it is. Morning came with cruel brightness, a perfect summer day that felt like mockery given what lay ahead. Clay dressed in his best clothes, the suit he'd worn to Margaret's funeral and hadn't touched since. Wren emerged from her room in a simple dress May had altered to fit, her hair brushed and pinned, looking simultaneously too young and too old for what was coming. They rode to town in May's wagon, Clay, Wren, May, Nora, and Eli. The streets were crowded with people who'd come to witness the trial, some supporting Crowley, others hoping to see justice finally served. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that dominated the town square, imposing and official in a way that made Clay's stomach tighten. Sheriff Danner met them at the entrance. Judge Harlan is presiding. He's fair, which is the best we can hope for. Doesn't owe Crowley any favors, but he's also a stickler for proper procedure. If the evidence was obtained illegally, he'll exclude it regardless of what it proves. So everything rides on the witnesses. Everything rides on the jury believing them. They filed into the courtroom, a high-ceilinged space with wooden benches and tall windows that let in streams of dusty light. The jury box was filled with 12 men, mostly farmers and shopkeepers, their faces carefully neutral. The judge's bench loomed at the front, empty for now. And at the defense table sat Silas Crowley, flanked by his lawyers, looking calm and confident in an expensive suit. When Crowley's eyes found Wren, his expression didn't change, but something in his gaze made the girl press closer to Clay. A promise, maybe. Or a threat. The certainty that regardless of how this trial ended, he would remember her defiance. Clay put a protective arm around her shoulders and met Crowley's stare without flinching. Whatever happened today, whatever verdict the jury reached, he'd make sure that man never touched Wren again, even if it meant spending the rest of his life making good on that promise. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Harlan entered, a stern-faced man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and somehow maintained faith in the law anyway. He surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes, then rapped his gavel. This court is now in session. The people versus Silas Crowley. Let's proceed. The prosecution, a territorial attorney named Morrison, who'd come down from Cheyenne specifically for this case, stood and began his opening statement. He was a compact man with a precise way of speaking, each word chosen for maximum impact. Gentlemen of the jury, over the next days you will hear testimony about crimes so monstrous they challenge belief. You will hear about children, orphaned, vulnerable, placed into the care of a man who promised safety and delivered torture. You will hear about systematic abuse, about children locked in cellars, about a little girl who died begging for medical care that was denied, about another child who walked 60 miles through brutal heat to escape, bearing bruises that tell a story more eloquent than words. He paused, letting the images settle. The defense will ask you to doubt. Will suggest these witnesses are liars, manipulators, people with axes to grind. But I ask you to look at the evidence with clear eyes, to see the pattern, to recognize evil when it wears a respectable face, Because that's what this case is about, seeing past wealth and influence to the truth underneath. Morrison sat down, and Thornton rose for the defense. He was taller than Morrison, with a commanding presence and a voice that carried natural authority. Gentlemen, my colleague speaks of monsters and evil, inflammatory language designed to bypass your reason and appeal to emotion. But this court deals in facts, not feelings, and the facts are these. Mr. Crowley took in orphaned children through legal channels, provided them work, shelter, education. Some of those children thrived. Others struggled with behavioral issues. Tragic as it is, one child fell ill and died despite my client's best efforts. He paced before the jury, making eye contact with each man. The prosecution's entire case rests on testimony from biased witnesses. A child who ran away and was taken in by a man with a history of instability. That same man broke into my client's home, assaulted him, and stole private documents. A former employee dismissed for theft. A doctor who bears a grudge over a business dispute. These are your witnesses, gentlemen. These are the people asking you to destroy a man's life and reputation. Thornton paused for effect. I ask you to see through the manipulation, to recognize that sometimes good people are targeted by those with agendas, and to remember that in this country, we presume innocence. The burden is on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. They cannot meet that burden, and when they fail, I trust you will render the only verdict justice allows, not guilty. He sat down, and Clay felt his stomach sink. The defense was good, better than he'd hoped. They were framing the narrative before any witness even took the stand, planting seeds of doubt that would grow with each piece of challenged testimony. Judge Harlan looked to Morrison. Call your first witness. The people called Dr. May Hollis. May took the stand with composed dignity, her medical bag set beside the witness chair like a talisman. She was sworn in and settled, meeting Morrison's gaze with steady eyes. Dr. Hollis, please tell the court about your first interaction with the defendant's alleged victim. May described that midnight call, finding Wren on Clay's sofa, the systematic documentation of injuries. She spoke in clinical terms, bruises in various stages of healing, rope burns, evidence of prolonged malnutrition, but beneath the professional language was barely contained fury. In your medical opinion, could these injuries have been accidentally sustained? No. The pattern was consistent with repeated, deliberate abuse over an extended period. Thornton rose for cross-examination, his expression sympathetic. Dr. Hollis, you've been practicing medicine in this territory for how long? 22 years. And in that time, you've developed relationships with your patients, friendships even. Some, yes. Would you say you're friends with Clay Mercer? May's eyes narrowed slightly. We're acquainted. I've treated him and his late wife. And when he called you in the middle of the night, you came immediately. No questions asked. A child was in medical distress. Of course I came. Because Mr. Mercer asked you to. Because you trust him. Because a child needed help. Thornton smiled gently. Dr. Hollis, is it possible that your friendship with Mr. Mercer influenced your interpretation of the injuries? That you saw abuse because that's what he expected you to see? Absolutely not. I documented what I observed. But interpretation requires judgment, and judgment can be clouded by personal relationships. Morrison objected, badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Harlan said. Move on, Mr. Thornton. Of course, Your Honor. Thornton turned back to May. Dr. Hollis, you testified these injuries couldn't be accidental. But isn't it true that a child who walked 60 miles barefoot through rough terrain could sustain significant injuries from that journey alone? Some injuries, yes, but not the pattern I documented. Not the bruising in different stages of healing, or the rope burns, or the signs of chronic malnutrition. But you didn't see where she came from, didn't witness how she got those injuries. You're inferring abuse based on appearance alone. I'm making a professional medical assessment based on years of experience. An assessment influenced by what Mr. Mercer told you to look for. That's not... No further questions. May stepped down, her face flushed with frustration. Clay met her eyes and nodded slightly. She'd done well, held her ground. But Thornton had accomplished what he needed, planted the suggestion that her testimony was tainted by bias. The day continued with witness after witness. Dutch McKenna testified about locked doors and missing children at Crowley's ranch. Thornton painted him as a simple tradesman who'd seen nothing definitive, just drawn conclusions based on gossip. Dr. Garrett took the stand, his hands shaking, and described the injuries he'd documented years ago. Thornton suggested his records had been altered after the fact, that age had made his memory unreliable. Nora Vance was perhaps the most painful to watch. She testified about hearing children crying in the cellar, about seeing them weak and bruised, about Crowley's threats when she questioned the treatment. But under Thornton's cross-examination, she faltered, admitted she'd never actually witnessed abuse directly, conceded she'd been fired for alleged theft, couldn't produce proof that she'd quit voluntarily as she claimed. By the time court recessed for the day, Clay felt the case slipping away. Every witness had been systematically undermined, their credibility chipped away until what remained was doubt, exactly what the defense needed. That evening, back at the ranch, Wren sat at the kitchen table pushing food around her plate. "They didn't believe them," she said quietly. "I could see it. The jury. They think everyone's lying." "We don't know what they think," Clay said. "They're supposed to stay neutral until all the evidence is in." "But you saw how those lawyers made our witnesses sound, like they were all confused or lying or holding grudges." Clay couldn't deny it. "Yes, that's their job, to create doubt." "Tomorrow I testify." "Yes. And they're going to do the same thing to me, make me sound like a liar, or like you coached me." "Probably." Wren looked up, her eyes fierce despite the fear underneath. "Then I'll just have to tell the truth better than they can lie. Make them see what really happened." May, who'd been listening from the doorway, came forward and took Wren's hand. "Remember what we practiced. Answer only what they ask. Don't let them rush you. If you need a moment, take it. And most importantly, don't let them make you doubt yourself. You know what happened. Hold on to that." That night, Clay found Wren on the porch long after she should have been sleeping. She sat on the steps, looking at the stars with an expression that was equal parts determination and terror. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her. "Keep thinking about tomorrow. About standing up there with everyone watching. About having to talk about," her voice caught, "about Lark. You don't have to do this. We can withdraw you as a witness. Let the case rest on the others. But they're not enough. You said so yourself. Without my testimony, there's no direct victim, just people who saw things or heard things. I'm the only one who lived it." "That's true, but it's not your responsibility to fix this. Isn't it?" She turned to look at him. "If I don't speak up, Crowley walks free. He gets to go back to his ranch and do this to other children. How do I live with that?" "The same way you live with everything else, one day at a time, doing the best you can." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to testify, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If I break down up there, if I can't finish, don't let them think it's because I'm lying. Make them understand I'm just—" She struggled for words. "Make them understand that some truths hurt too much to speak easily." Clay pulled her close. "I promise. But Wren, you're stronger than you think, braver than you know. And tomorrow when you take that stand, every word you speak will matter. Not because it might convict Crowley, though I hope it does, but because you'll be refusing to be silenced. You'll be claiming your voice after years of having it stolen." She leaned against him, and they sat there under the stars, a man still learning to hope, and a girl still learning to trust, both preparing for a battle that would determine everything. Morning arrived with the weight of finality. Clay woke before dawn to find Wren already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded like she was praying, or perhaps just trying to keep them from shaking. May had stayed the night and was making coffee, moving through the ritual with the focused calm of someone preparing for battle. "You eat something," May said, setting a plate of eggs and bread in front of Wren. "You'll need your strength." Wren stared at the food but didn't touch it. "I can't. My stomach feels like it's tied in knots." "Then at least drink some water. Last thing you need is to faint on that stand." They rode to town in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The courthouse square was even more crowded than the day before. Word had spread that the child victim would testify, and people had come from surrounding counties to witness it. Some faces showed sympathy, others skepticism, a few outright hostility. Clay kept Wren close as they pushed through the crowd, shielding her from the stares and whispered comments. Inside the courtroom, Crowley sat at the defense table, looking refreshed and confident, as if he'd slept peacefully while his accusers tossed through nightmares. When his gaze found Wren, he smiled, small and cold, a predator's acknowledgement of cornered prey. Clay felt Wren tense beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder and leaned close. "Don't look at him. Look at me, or look at May, or look at the judge. But don't give him the satisfaction of seeing your fear." She nodded and fixed her eyes on the judge's empty bench, her jaw set with determination that looked both brave and heartbreaking on a face so young. Judge Harlan entered and called the court to order. Morrison stood, his expression grave. "The people call Wren Ashby." The bailiff came to escort Wren to the witness stand. She stood on legs that looked unsteady, smoothed her dress with trembling hands, and walked the length of the courtroom like she was approaching a gallows. Every eye in the room followed her. The silence was absolute. She was sworn in, her voice barely audible when she promised to tell the truth. Then she sat in the witness chair, small and alone, facing a room full of strangers who would judge whether her suffering was real or imagined. Morrison approached gently, his voice soft. "Wren, I know this is difficult. Take your time. If you need a break at any point, just tell me, all right?" She nodded. "Let's start with how you came to be at Mr. Crowley's ranch. Can you tell the court about that?" Wren's hands twisted in her lap. "My sister Lark and me, we were at the Territorial Orphanage in Laramie. We'd been there 2 years since our parents died of fever. Mr. Crowley came looking for children to work his ranch, said he'd give us food and shelter and teach us trades." Her voice grew softer. "Said we'd be part of a family. And did you believe him?" "We wanted to. We were tired of the orphanage, tired of being nobody's children. So when he chose us, we thought maybe things would get better." "When did you realize they wouldn't?" Wren was quiet for a moment, gathering herself. "The first night. He took us to his ranch and showed us the cellar. Said that's where bad children went, where ungrateful children learned their place." She swallowed hard. "Then he locked us in there. Just for the night," he said. "So we'd understand how good we had it when he let us out." "How long were you in that cellar?" 3 days the first time. No light, no food, water once a day, brought by one of his men. We could hear other children crying. Later we learned there were 2 boys in another room, Henry and Thomas." Morrison let the image settle, then continued. "What happened when you were released?" "He put us to work, in the house, in the kitchen, cleaning. We had to earn our food," he said, "had to prove we were worth keeping. If we made mistakes or worked too slow, we went back to the cellar." "And did you make mistakes?" Wren's eyes filled with tears. "I tried so hard not to, but I was 10. Lark was 8. We were just children trying not to make a monster angry." Thornton stood. "Objection. Characterization." "Sustained," Judge Harlan said. "The witness will refrain from editorial comments." Morrison nodded. "Wren, can you describe the physical treatment you and your sister received?" This was the hard part. Wren's breathing quickened, and for a moment Clay thought she might bolt. But she closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to speak. "He hit us. With his hands, with a belt, sometimes with whatever was nearby. If we spilled something or broke something or just looked at him wrong. The bruises," her voice cracked. "The bruises were always fresh because there was always a reason to hit us." "Did anyone try to stop him?" "The ranch hands didn't care. The cook, Nora, she tried once. He threatened to fire her and make sure she never worked again. After that, she just looked away. I don't blame her. Everyone was scared of him." "Tell the court about your sister, about Lark." Wren's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice broke into pieces. She was so little, so sweet. She used to sing, before. Used to make up songs about birds and sunshine and growing up to see the ocean. She wiped her eyes roughly. At Crowley's place, she stopped singing, got quieter every day, like he was erasing her piece by piece. "What happened to her, Wren?" The courtroom was so silent that the sound of Wren's breathing seemed loud. She stared at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "We got locked in the cellar again. I don't even remember why. Some small thing, probably. We were down there for a week. It was cold and wet, and there were rats. Lark started coughing, just a little at first, then worse. Then she got a fever. Wren's whole body was shaking now. I begged them to let us out, pounded on the door until my hands bled, screamed that she needed a doctor. They ignored me. Morrison waited, letting her find her words. After 3 days, she was burning up, could barely breathe. I held her and tried to keep her warm with my body, but it wasn't enough. She kept asking for water, for our mother, for the pain to stop. Wren's voice broke completely. I told her I loved her, told her to hold on, told her someone would come help. I lied to my dying sister because I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, that nobody was coming, that we didn't matter enough to save. She couldn't continue, just sat there sobbing while the courtroom watched in horrified silence. Even Thornton had gone pale, though his expression remained professionally neutral. Morrison gave her a moment, then spoke gently. What happened next? Wren dragged in a shaking breath. She died in my arms, in the dark, alone except for me. And I couldn't even see her face at the end, couldn't give her that much. She looked up at Morrison with eyes full of anguish. When they finally opened the door, Crowley looked at her body and said she was weak. That weak children were a waste of resources. He made me help bury her in the back field. No marker, no prayer, just dirt over the only family I had left. The jury sat transfixed. Several men had tears in their eyes. Others looked like they wanted to be sick. Only Crowley remained unmoved, his expression carefully blank. Morrison let the silence stretch, then asked one final question. Why did you run, Wren? Because I knew I was next. Knew that if I stayed, I'd end up in an unmarked grave beside my sister. So I waited until he went to town, broke the cellar lock, and I ran. She looked directly at the jury now, her voice steady despite the tears. I ran 60 miles barefoot through heat that should have killed me, hid during the day when I heard riders searching, drank from muddy creeks and ate nothing for days. I kept running because going back meant dying, and I couldn't let Lark's death be for nothing. Couldn't let him win. Thank you, Wren. No further questions. Morrison sat down, and Thornton rose for cross-examination. He approached the stand with careful sympathy, his voice gentle. Miss Ashby, I can see how painful this is for you. I'll try to be brief. Wren straightened, wiping her eyes. She'd given her testimony. Now came the part where they tried to take it apart. You testified that Mr. Crowley beat you. Can you show the court any scars from these beatings? Wren's jaw tightened. They healed. Most of them. So we're to take your word that these beatings occurred despite the absence of permanent scarring. Dr. Hollis documented the bruises when I first arrived at Mr. Mercer's ranch. Bruises that could have come from your 60-mile journey, from falls, from exposure, from any number of causes. They came from him, from his hands, his belt, his fists. Thornton's expression remained sympathetic. Miss Ashby, you're a child who's been through significant trauma. Is it possible that in your distressed state you've conflated different events? That you've taken hardships from your journey and attributed them to Mr. Crowley? No, I know what happened. I was there. You were also taken in by Mr. Mercer immediately after arriving at his ranch, a man who, by his own admission, has struggled with depression and isolation since his wife's death. Is it possible he influenced your memories? Suggested interpretations that aligned with his own suspicions? He didn't suggest anything. I told him what happened, and he believed me. But before that, you'd been walking for days in extreme heat, dehydrated, starving, possibly delirious. Your memories from that period might not be entirely reliable. Morrison stood. Objection. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained. Mr. Thornton, ask questions. Thornton nodded. Miss Ashby, when you arrived at Mr. Mercer's ranch, what was the first thing he asked you? He asked if I was hurt, if I needed help. And you said? I said, please. I asked for help. Did you tell him about Mr. Crowley at that time? Not right away. I was too scared, too sick. So Mr. Mercer formed his opinions about your condition before hearing your story. He saw my bruises. He saw a sick, injured child and drew conclusions. Then, over the following days, while you recovered in his home, eating his food and sleeping under his roof, you told him a story that confirmed those conclusions. Is that accurate? Wren's hands clenched. It's not a story. It's what happened. But you understand how it might appear. A traumatized child, taken in by a man with his own grief and anger, the two of you constructing a narrative that justifies his decision to keep you rather than return you to your legal guardian? He's not my guardian. He's my murderer. He killed my sister, and he would have killed me. So you say. But we have only your word for that. No witnesses to this alleged abuse. No evidence beyond bruises that could have many causes. Just your testimony, shaped by weeks of living with a man who had every reason to believe the worst about Mr. Crowley. Wren stood up in the witness box, her small frame shaking with fury. I'm not lying. My sister died in my arms. I held her while she stopped breathing. I helped bury her in a field like she was nothing. That happened. It happened, and nobody stopped it, and now you're trying to make it sound like I made it up. Judge Harlan rapped his gavel. Miss Ashby, please sit down. But Wren wasn't done. She turned to the jury, tears streaming down her face. I know what you're thinking, that I'm just a child. The children lie or get confused or can't remember things right. But I remember every second of my sister's death. I remember the sound of her coughing, the feel of her fever, the way she stopped fighting at the end. I remember begging for help that never came. I remember being told I wasn't worth saving. Her voice broke. You can believe me or not. You can decide my pain isn't real or my memories aren't reliable. But that doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring back the children he killed. Doesn't stop him from doing it again. She sat down heavily, exhausted and shaking. Thornton watched her with an unreadable expression, then turned to the jury. No further questions. The prosecution rested. Morrison called no more witnesses. Wren's testimony stood alone, raw and powerful and deeply vulnerable to attack. The defense, as expected, called Crowley himself. The man took the stand with calm dignity, was sworn in, and settled into the witness chair like he owned it. Thornton led him through a carefully constructed narrative. He'd taken in orphaned children out of Christian charity, provided them work, shelter, education. Yes, he'd been strict. Children needed discipline to thrive. But he'd never abused anyone, never locked children in cellars except for brief timeouts when behavior demanded correction. Never denied medical care. The Ashby girl's sister died of pneumonia, Crowley said, his voice filled with manufactured sadness. A terrible tragedy. I did everything I could, provided warm blankets, nourishing food, rest, but sometimes illness wins despite our best efforts. As for Wren's accusations, I believe she's a traumatized child who's been manipulated by Mr. Mercer into believing falsehoods. I bear her no ill will. I only want what's best for her, which is proper care, not living with a man who encourages her delusions. It was a masterful performance, calm, reasonable, touched with just enough sorrow to seem human without appearing weak. Morrison's cross-examination made little headway. Crowley had answers for everything, explanations that sounded plausible, if you wanted to believe them. The closing arguments came next. Morrison spoke with controlled passion about patterns of abuse, about children who'd disappeared, about a system that had failed its most vulnerable. Thornton countered with reasonable doubt, with questions about evidence and reliability, with the suggestion that sometimes good people were destroyed by false accusations and mob mentality. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Clay spent that time in the hallway with Wren, May, and Eli, unable to eat or sit still. Wren sat pressed against his side, silent and pale, staring at nothing. When the bailiff finally called them back, the courtroom filled quickly. Clay's heart hammered as the jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Judge Harlan took his place and addressed the foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. How do you find? The foreman stood, holding a piece of paper. He looked at Crowley, then at Wren, then back to the paper. On the charge of murder and the death of Lark Ashby, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Crowley surged to his feet, his calm mask finally cracking. This is insane! You're convicting me on the word of a child and stolen documents. Judge Harlan's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order in this court. The foreman continued reading. On charges of child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy, guilty on all counts. Wren made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and collapsed against Clay. He held her while chaos swirled around them, people shouting and crying and demanding justice or protesting injustice, depending on which side they'd chosen. Judge Harlan brought down his gavel repeatedly until silence fell. Silas Crowley, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will occur 1 week from today. Until then, you will remain in custody. Bailiff, remove the defendant. Crowley was dragged from the courtroom, still protesting, still claiming innocence, his voice fading as the doors closed behind him. Clay didn't watch him go, just held Wren and let her cry, this time not from fear or pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being believed. May appeared beside them, her own eyes wet. It's over, child. It's finally over. But Wren shook her head against Clay's chest. Not yet. Not until he's sentenced. Not until I know he can't hurt anyone else. A week later, they returned to the courthouse for sentencing. Judge Harlan had reviewed all evidence, all testimony, the jury's findings. He looked at Crowley with undisguised contempt. Mr. Crowley, you exploited the most vulnerable members of our society. You took children who had nothing and no one, and you tortured them. You killed them. You buried them in unmarked graves and expected the world to look away. His voice hardened. This court will not look away. For the murder of Lark Ashby and the deaths of 11 other children whose remains have now been recovered from your property, I sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. May whatever deity you answer to have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Crowley didn't scream or protest this time, just stood there as the words washed over him, his face gone gray. He was led away to await execution, and this time when the door closed, it felt final. Outside the courthouse, Clay found Wren standing in the sunshine, her face turned toward the sky. She looked different somehow, not healed, not whole, but less haunted, like a weight she'd carried for so long had finally been lifted. How do you feel? Clay asked. She considered the question seriously. Sad? For Lark, for the others, for all the time we lost being scared when we should have been safe. She paused. But also lighter, like I can finally breathe all the way down. That's grief and relief living together. It's okay to feel both. What happens now? To me, I mean. Clay had been thinking about this since the verdict, had spoken with Sheriff Danner and a territorial judge about legal options. Now we make it official. I file adoption papers. You become Wren Mercer, if you want that name. And you stay at the ranch as my daughter, not my ward. Permanent, legal, unbreakable. Her eyes widened. You mean it? Every word. You walked into my life carrying more courage than I'd seen in years, and you reminded me what it means to fight for something that matters. I'd be honored if you'd let me be your father, not a replacement for what you lost. Nobody could replace your parents or your sister. But maybe something new. Something we build together. Wren threw her arms around him, and Clay held her while people streamed past, some stopping to offer congratulations, others averting their eyes from the public display of emotion. He didn't care. This child had survived hell and come out the other side still believing in the possibility of home. The least he could do was give her one. The adoption was finalized 3 weeks later in Judge Harlan's chambers. It was a simple ceremony, Clay, Wren, May as witness, and Eli standing by with a grin that threatened to crack his weathered face. When Wren signed her new name for the first time, Wren Ashby Mercer, keeping her sister's memory and her identity, her hand shook, but her letters were clear. That night, back at the ranch, Clay made dinner while Wren set the table. It was ordinary, domestic, the kind of moment that passed unremarked in most households. But for them, it felt revolutionary, the simple act of existing together without fear or uncertainty. After dinner, Wren helped with dishes, then paused at the window overlooking the ridge where Margaret and the baby were buried. Do you think they'd mind? She asked quietly. Your wife and son, that I'm here. Clay came to stand beside her. I think Margaret would say you belong here, that our son, his voice caught, but he pushed through, that he would have been lucky to have a sister like you, smart and brave and refusing to give up even when the world gave you every reason to. I still miss Lark every day. I know, and you always will. That's the price of loving someone. When they're gone, they leave a space nothing else can fill. But missing them doesn't mean you can't build new love, can't find new family. Lark would want you to be happy, wouldn't she? Yes, she always wanted me to be happy. Even when we had nothing, she'd try to make me smile. Then live for her. Build a life she'd be proud of. Honor her memory by refusing to let what happened to her break you. Wren nodded, then turned from the window and hugged him. Thank you. For not giving up on me. For fighting when it would have been easier to look away. Clay held her close. Thank you for knocking on my door that night. For trusting me enough to stay. For reminding me that life still asks things of us even after we think we're done living. They stood there as darkness fell, two survivors holding on to each other in a world that had tried to destroy them both and failed. Outside, the land stretched vast and unforgiving, but inside there was warmth. Safety. The tentative beginnings of something that looked like family. Over the following months, the ranch transformed. Clay hired more hands, expanded operations, started turning a profit for the first time in years. Wren attended school in town, struggled at first with reading and numbers, but worked with determined focus until she caught up and then surpassed her classmates. May taught her basic medicine, and Eli's wife taught her to sew and garden. She was growing into herself, filling out the hollow places trauma had carved. But some nights, Clay would wake to hear her crying in her room. He'd go to her and hold her while she grieved for Lark, for the childhood stolen, for the innocence she'd never get back. He didn't try to fix it or make it better, just sat with her in the darkness and let her know she didn't have to be alone with her pain. Other nights, though, he'd hear laughter. Wren had made friends at school, other girls who included her in their games and secrets. She'd started drawing again, something she'd done before Crowley but had stopped during her captivity. Her sketches covered the walls of her room now, birds and landscapes and portraits of people she loved. 1 year after the trial, on the anniversary of Lark's death, Clay took Wren to the ridge at sunrise. They'd placed a marker there, simple stone carved with Lark's name and the dates of her too short life. Beside it was space for others, the 11 children whose remains had been recovered from Crowley's property and given proper burial. Wren knelt at her sister's grave and placed wildflowers on the stone. I miss you, she whispered, every single day. But I'm okay now. I'm safe. And I'm going to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. Clay stood back, giving her space. When she finally rose and took his hand, there were tears on her cheeks, but also something like peace in her eyes. Ready? He asked. Ready. They walked back down the ridge together as the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. The ranch house stood solid in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where May was making breakfast. Eli's horse was tied at the fence. He'd come early to help with the morning chores, the way he always did. This was home now. Not perfect, not untouched by grief, but real. Built on truth and trust and the stubborn refusal to let evil have the final word. Clay looked down at Wren, his daughter now, legally and in his heart, and felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile kind that shattered at the first setback, but something deeper, more resilient, the kind forged in fire and proven through trial. You know what your sister would say? He asked as they neared the house. What? That you kept your promise. You ran. You found help. You saved yourself. Wren smiled through her tears. I didn't do it alone. No, but you took the first step. Everything else built from that. They reached the porch where May waited with coffee and fresh bread. Inside, the table was set for 4. Clay, Wren, May, and Eli, the family they'd chosen rather than the ones they'd lost. It wasn't replacement, wasn't forgetting. Just proof that even after the worst happened, life could still offer moments worth living for. Clay held the door open for Wren, and she walked through into warmth and light and the smell of home. Behind them, the sun continued its climb, burning off the last shadows of night and illuminating a land that was harsh and beautiful and full of possibility for those brave enough to claim it. The light in the window wasn't for ghosts anymore. It was for the living, especially the lost ones walking home under a Wyoming sky, carrying their grief and their courage in equal measure, refusing to surrender to darkness because somewhere, somehow, they'd learned that hope was worth fighting for. And in the end, that fight was the only one that truly mattered.